right, fantastic.
Right.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be here, Congressman.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to the conversation. I appreciate your audiences, and I think it's important for us to have these conversations not just on MSNBC and in the New York Times, but to really broaden the forums where people talk about important issues.
Yep, streaming culture, right? You're getting in on that, the youth vote here. I mean, I have to ask you because obviously this morning Senator Dianne Feinstein passed away today. You are a congressman from California. Just your reaction to her passing. I know that that leaves a massive hole in California. What do you have to say and just reflecting on her legacy?
Well, first of all, it's very sad. She's was a national icon, a state icon. I mean, she fought for women's rights, was a trailblazer on that, for reproductive rights. She was personally affected by gun violence as the mayor of San Francisco and led the fight to ban assault weapons. She has been such a champion on environmental issues. So she's in my thoughts, she's in my prayers, and it's a loss for the country and for the state.
Yeah, I mean, you have endorsed Barbara Lee for Senate. What is your opinion on who Gavin Newsom should appoint to replace Senator Feinstein? Because he has promised that he will appoint a black woman for that vacancy. Do you think Barbara Lee is the right choice to appoint?
Well, it shouldn't even be a choice. It's obvious he needs to appoint Barbara Lee. I mean, he made a commitment to appoint an African-American woman, and Barbara Lee has by far the most support. She's put in the work. She's mobilized the grassroots. She has the progressive support, and she's been working for 6 to 7 months. So to pass her over at this point really would be a very bad look, and it would upset a lot of people in the African-American community, not just in California, but around the country. I know that's how my colleagues in the Congressional Black Caucus feel.
Yeah, you know, to be honest, it feels like this couldn't come at a worse time as well. An absence from the Democrats in both the Senate and the Senate Judiciary Committee opens up a weakness. It seems like we won't be able to run any judges through or appoint them proper for some time. I think this relates a lot to what we're here to talk about, because this issue, this gridlock, I mean, that's far from the only thing happening right now in Congress. It speaks to a level of institutional gridlock that I think alienates a lot of people. There are many independents in this country, people who don't vote, young, disaffected people who have strong moral convictions, but don't actually show up to the ballot box. I was wondering, you know, you rep from California. I'm sure you've had more than your fair share of efforts speaking to the youth. How do you feel about the young folks in this country and their opinion on how things can or maybe can't get done at a federal level?
Well, they're the hope, and they are exasperated, candidly. I mean, they see change not happening fast enough. They see too much big money in politics, PAC money, lobbyist money. I've said, let's ban all PAC money, let's ban all lobbyist money, let's have members of Congress not become lobbyists. So they see these big oil, big pharma, big health insurance companies, big Wall Street firms having too much influence. And then they see positive things like let's forgive student loans, and it doesn't happen. And I've been in rooms where I said, I fought for it, the president did it, and they said, we really don't care, Ro. We don't want to hear it. I mean, the reality is we're still paying off these big loans. And I know what that's like. I had $100,000 of loans. I've done very well in life now, but there was a time in my 20s where I had to go on forbearance, where I couldn't make that payment. So if you're in that situation, it doesn't really matter who's advocating what. The bottom line is your life hasn't changed. And from what young people want to see is two things. One, they want to see actual results for them to keep coming out to vote. And two, they want to see real fight. So what does that look like? Well, why didn't we zero out the loans once we did this before it went to the Supreme Court? Why don't we have a halt on payment now and be more assertive? We've got to push on the issues they care about.
You talk about the influence of big money in politics. David Sachs hosted a fundraiser for you. This was reported by Puck News and then followed up by the American Prospect. How do you square your rhetoric on getting big money out of politics and then also David Sachs, who's a big Republican donor, PayPal guy, hosting a fundraiser for you?
Well, he supported Democrats as well, but I think it's a fair question. I take no PAC money. I take no lobbyist money. I don't have any super PAC. So I do have individuals contribute, and those individuals are people who have are maxed out at $3,300. And in raising money, I mean, yes, David Sachs contributed. Other leaders in Silicon Valley and others have contributed. Teachers have contributed. Nurses have contributed. But I don't take any of the corporate money. I don't take any political action money. I don't take any lobbyist money. Is that fully clean? No, but it's much cleaner than the vast majority of members of Congress. And David Sachs did support me, and the reason he supported me was my advocacy for free speech on Twitter, where my private emails leaked, and I had said that they shouldn't censor the New York Post reporter, and they shouldn't have taken that down. And he also supported me because I had drafted a letter with the Congressional Progressive Caucus saying that there has to be dialogue on Ukraine, even though I've supported all of the Ukraine aid. And so we disagree on a lot of issues, but I think it's a strength that you can find certain common ground with people to agree on, and that's why he did support me.
Do you understand, though, why maybe some on the left may raise their eyebrows at that, and would you pledge not to take money from someone like Sachs in the future?
No, because I would pledge to be consistent on the positions I've had. I'm for a wealth tax. I'm for raising the minimum wage. I'm for Medicare for all. I'm for free public college. I'm for cutting the bloated defense budget. And I've done this despite taking support from an individual. So I have not, I would ask people on the left to say, look at my record. Look at where I've stood on the different issues and where I will go to David Sachs fundraiser and say, talk about taxing wealth. In fact, there's probably a clip of me saying, I think millionaires and billionaires should be taxed too much. Now, if I can find common ground with people on free speech or some other area, I think that's important for the majority coalition for progressives. So I will pledge to not taking money from PACs, to not taking money from lobbyists, to not having super PACs in a primary. I don't think we should unilaterally disarm against the Republicans or Trump, but certainly shouldn't have super PACs in a primary, and to being consistent on my views on taxation and progressive policy.
You know, I think this speaks to what we do as well. Of course, Emma and myself are live streamers. New technology, getting out there, talking to lots of folks with very little startup cost. What I've noticed, at least when I talk to people my age or younger, is that there is a fundamental, almost axiomatic lack of trust in politicians. And it really doesn't matter how clean they are. There's a fundamental, first principles,
Yeah.
And then everything after that is
they
okay.
assume you're corrupt.
Right. And, I don't think the assumption is entirely unfounded. We know Washington, of course, has had its fair share of scandals and corruption. In terms of individual behavior, it's difficult, I think, to project the image of authenticity, which is seemingly exactly what people are looking for. Donald Trump, of course, has captured the hearts of the Republican Party through what I would consider an extremely inauthentic bid at being real,
Right. He speaks his mind.
It's just aesthetic.
Oh, it's fully aesthetic. It's not real. He lies all the time, but the aesthetic counts, And this is what I've been concerned with when it comes to Democratic fundraising. The Democrats, if you ask people about policy, would you like to see, the child tax credits? Would you like to see funding for this institution? Would you like to see this, that? You ask them about Democrat policies without saying Democrats, America loves it. 70% of Americans go for what Democrats sell.
Right.
You mention Democrats, now you're 50-50. It gets really tough. So the question is, why is there that gap? What is the disconnect between the popular policy and the, not unpopular, but gridlocked, Democratic Party?
That's a very thoughtful question. I would say a couple things. One, there was a mistake made in this country by both parties of offshoring our jobs, of allowing the middle class and working class to be hollowed out. We saw factory towns shutter. We saw the wealth disparity grow, CEO pay go from 15 to 1 to 300 to 1. So a lot of working class voters, a lot of middle class voters said, this system is not working. And that's why I supported Bernie Sanders in 2016. Trump modeled that with the same grievance, and he said the status quo is not working. Look, if I was growing up or living in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, or Lordstown, Ohio, I'd probably vote against anyone in the status quo establishment too. My life has gotten materially worse. So the first thing the Democrats need to do is acknowledge that there were mistakes made by both parties in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. The second thing is that we've got to get rid of the corporate influence in our party. Obama ran not taking PAC money, not taking lobbyist money, and telling the DNC not to take corporate money. Then suddenly now we're taking corporate money again. We've moved backwards from how Obama ran in 2008. Now, I'm not pure like Bernie Sanders, who could just do all of his grassroots fundraising at $27. I'm just being honest, right? That's the other thing. Like, people want honesty. If I came here and said, look, I'm doing all grassroots fundraising, they'd go Google it and say the guy's full of it. You know, I take contributions, individual contributions, up to $3,300. But that's a lot better than having defense contractors, big pharma, big oil companies pour in money, and then people say, where's the progress? You're promising us Medicare for all. You're promising us free public college. You're promising us not a bloated defense budget, but then you've got all these special interests pouring in money into your campaigns. And so I think the Democratic Party needs a reform economic message saying that the hollowing out of the working and middle class was wrong and here's what we're going to do, and a reform political message. And we've got to show up and we've got to acknowledge that there were mistakes that the party made.
And I mean, there have been some steps that have been taken back, but I am encouraged by Biden going to the UAW picket.
Absolutely.
I mean, that is, for me, one of the most seismic shifts in Democratic Party consensus that I think we can, at least as it relates to labor, in a long, long time. And I think it's important. Just your response to the insurgent labor movement and how this summer and into this fall, it feels like unions are winning back the public trust, and we're finally getting rid of that Reaganomics perspective about how bad unions are, and the public seems to be at least coming along with that in supporting the UAW and other, the SAG-AFTRA strike, for example.
It's inspiring. I was, the first member of Congress actually on the SAG picket lines, and I was really proud to be on the picket lines with UAW workers in Wayne and Toledo, and a bunch of us, Debbie Dingell, Rashida, and I, were calling on the president to come. We didn't think he would. I give the president tremendous credit for showing up with the workers and not having both sides of the issue. I mean, it's clear that the CEOs are making $30 million. They put $5 billion in stock buybacks. These workers are making $15-16, and they deserve a raise. They deserve to be made whole for the cuts they took in 2008. But you look at them, you look at what the Teamsters are doing with UPS, you look at the Starbucks workers, you look at Amazon, Chipotle. This is the next generation of finally people saying enough with the gross income inequality. And if we combine a new production agenda, bring back new manufacturing, bring back technology across America with a labor movement that requires fair wages, then I think we can start to stitch this country back together. Two mistakes that have been made. Why did we give all this money in the IRA to states that had no labor requirements? Alabama, Tennessee, right, hollowing out more of the working class. That was a mistake. See, this is where people get angry at the party. Okay, we like the IRA, but you're giving the money. The big three are taking it Tennessee and to Kentucky, and they're not good-paying jobs. Second mistake, why did the governor in California veto the regulation saying that if you're going to have a big driverless truck over 10,000 pounds, that you should have a driver there, and side with the capital class, many in my district in Silicon Valley? I mean, if people fear technology displacing them, they're not opposed to technology, but they want to make sure they're part of the decisions with technology. So these are the types of things the Democratic Party needs to be for. We need to be for a working class labor agenda.
Yeah, no, that's the current fight, it seems. There's nothing that people, especially young people, I feel, distrust more than a public message of support for labor backed by nothing, just, the sentiment. Biden actually going down there, you going down there to the strikes, I think it speaks to what people are fighting over, at least on an aesthetic level. I'm sure you saw, but recently, following Biden's presence at the strike, Trump also went down there and wasn't at the strike. Yes. He spoke to a group of supporters at a non-union organized event, and media covered it as though he and Biden were both taking a shot, out there with the union. Some even just outright said that Trump was out there on the strike line. It seems like people are really eager to commit themselves to a pro-labor agenda. No, I mean, Trump ran on this back in 2016, right? Bring back Rust Belt jobs. Yeah. He didn't, of course, but people care about that stuff. And I think more so than any group right now, young people, because they're being born into a country where there seems to be very little hope of the future. They may be the hope of this country, but they look forward and they see a blighted abyss of gig jobs and no health coverage. I'm not surprised that they feel disaffected. How do you think the Dems could work to reach out to them?
That's a really great thought. Let me encapsulate it by saying they may be the hope of the country, but they feel no hope, right? That's kind of the irony of this next generation. And here's what I'm really proud of them. The Gen Z for Change and the climate groups, they've been the first ones on the front lines with the UAW workers, right? They're saying there's no difference between a climate movement and worker justice, that the climate new jobs have to be good paying jobs. Many of them have to be union jobs. There has to be a right to organize. Here's why I think we're not breaking through. Because Donald Trump, I saw his speech. I had to see his speech because I was on News Nation responding to him. And so they had the earpiece on and I heard his whole take. And if you didn't know anything, you'd say, Trump's saying they hollowed out your jobs left, the working class is getting shafted, I'm going to bring those jobs back. And if it was just that, you'd say, wow, the guy gets what I've been through. And part of the challenge for us as Democrats is showing up and validating people's anger. We can't just say, okay, we've created 13 million jobs, which we have. Unemployment is at record lows. Inflation is heading down. The average person sitting there saying, you know what? I'm still not making enough for groceries, rent, and gas. My income has gone down from what my father used to earn. My daughter is probably not going to have the same opportunities. And these folks are trying to sell me that the economy is great. Now, what we have to say is we understand the anger. But look at the record. Donald Trump had 4 years. There was no new steel plant. There were no new auto plants. More plants closed. We've just started.
For example.
Foxconn.
Yeah.
It's total a con game. He's validating your legitimate anger, but he's got no vision and solutions. Here are our vision and solutions, and then talk about what we have done, but say this is just step one on a scale of 1 to 10. That this is going to take a decade to rebuild because it took 40 years to deplete. And I think that kind of honest talk is what will connect with people. Instead of just right now, you've got two talking points. Trump is out there saying the economy is terrible. We're out there trying to say the economy is great. And people are saying, no, the economy is tough still. What we should be saying is we're starting to reverse the damage, but it's a long project and we need to continue to work on real solutions.
Just turning to foreign policy for a second, you've been a longtime critic of United States foreign policy and some of the interventionist elements of what we've engaged in. You also did vote yay on a bill denouncing the horrors of socialism, and you're one of the few progressives to do so. I mean, the whole squad voted no. Katie Porter in your state also voted no. Why did you take that vote? Because I think a lot of young people do identify with democratic socialism at the very least, and progressivism and socialism, they can have a dual track, right? I think that they kind of are connected. What's your response to that?
Well, I call myself a FDR Democrat with actually FDR plus Eleanor Roosevelt, because Eleanor Roosevelt was against the incarceration of the Japanese, and so a multiracial, multi-ethnic New Deal coalition. And part of the coalition of FDR were democratic socialists and liberals and progressives, and it was a majoritarian broad coalition, and I think we have to build that movement. But I wanted to make clear that I am for free enterprise. I am for the cooperation with business and labor to build America. I am not for the government owning things. I think when the progressives allow the Republicans to frame it in that way, they're depriving us of a majoritarian coalition. And what I'd like to do is build a majoritarian coalition for Medicare for all, for free public college, for a policy of bringing manufacturing back, for taxing wealth, and not have people say that, oh, the guy's a socialist, as they did to Bernie. I'll say, look, I represent a district with more wealth than anywhere in humanity. 1/3 of the S&P 500 is in my district. So I understand why people were upset, and there were people who were upset with that vote. But my goal is to try to make the progressive movement, without compromising my ideals, a majority movement that can, for the next 20 years, usher in a majority era. And I think FDR's example is instructive, where he didn't call himself a socialist, but he had a coalition of a lot of people fighting for progressive ideals.
Understood. I just feel that the United States' history of foreign interventions is marked by essentially overthrowing socialist governments and leftist leaders. And so I'm just trying to connect your very poignant critique of United States foreign policy with a vote saying that socialism is this evil.
Although my grandfather was part of Gandhi's independence movement and Nehruvian socialism back in the 1960s. I disagreed with the economics of it, but if you go to his Wikipedia page, Amarnath Vidyalankar, you'd see his advocacy, and you'd see that I'm deeply proud of my grandfather's activism. I certainly don't think the United States should have a license to intervene to topple regimes because they may be socialistic. That doesn't mean that I want socialism in the United States. So I think there's a distinction between some of the foreign policy that was an overreach, whether it was the enabling of Pinochet, whether it was the overthrow of Mossadegh in Iran, whether it was Lumumba in the Congo. There are critiques of American foreign policy, of overreach, and I certainly don't think that America should be in the business of regime change.
Understood.
I think the coalition building is the key, right? In my experiences seeing people online, their frustration, a lot of disaffected young folks and progressives, there is a strong perception, we don't need to get into whether or not, to what extent it's true, that Bernie Sanders was not looked favorably upon by the DNC, that there would have been significant internal opposition to him had he become president, that it existed while he was running both times. Whether or not that's true, that fear that socialists or people who lean very progressive aren't allowed at the table is something that disillusions a lot of people. They're young, and young people are, of course, more inclined towards idealistic thinking. They're more likely to be politically radical in any direction, I feel. And they're concerned that there's not a seat at the table, that if getting into politics means they have to shut up and play the party line, that there's no point. And that anti-electoral message, or that feeling they get, I think it cuts a lot of them out of the process. It weakens them, which is a shame for all of us, because as we know, young people are the strongest Democratic leaning group in the country. Is there something you think the Dems could do to show a sign that they are willing to open up that seat, even if you don't agree on the economics specifically, towards what you do care about?
Well, first of all, I think, having talked to young people, and correct me if I'm wrong or what your impression is, my sense is the three things that animate them the most. One is free health care. I mean, it's absurd in this country that you have people having medical debt, having co-pays, having to worry about them or their parents or grandparents getting health care. Two is free college or career training. They don't want to go into a lifetime of debt to go become an electrician, carpenter, or go to college. And three is climate, that they want to see much bolder action. They don't understand how you can have the Willow Project be approved in the largest oil project on public land while professing to care about climate. They don't understand how Greta Thunberg, who I had in front of my committee, said it was a punch to the gut if you guys don't do anything to remove fossil fuel subsidies with accelerated depreciation in the United States, $7 trillion worldwide of fossil fuel subsidies. How are we not doing anything about that? So my view is, I don't think that it's about the labels as much as it's about the policies. Why aren't we running the Democratic Party on Medicare for all as part of our party platform, a wealth tax when we have so much disparity, free public college, making sure that we actually are eliminating fossil fuel subsidies, making sure that we are not having new pipe approvals on public lands, making sure right now in California, in my state, there was a law passed to say don't have new drilling next to 3,000 feet of residential neighborhoods, but they're still approving the new drilling because it's a ballot initiative. I think what young people care about is the substance. And what they're sick of is politicians just giving the platitudes. Oh, big oil is bad, or we need universal health care, but then not endorsing the specific policies. And what Bernie did is he said, no, here are the specific things I stand for. And that's what appealed to them. And my view is we've got to be specific. We've got to have a platform that actually speaks to that, that's willing to fight the big interests, because invite other politicians in. My guess is if you said to them, do you support Bernie Sanders' Medicare for all? They'd quibble. Do you support free public college? They'd quibble. Do you support a wealth tax? They'd quibble. Are you firm in no permitting on public lands and no new permitting near residential areas? They'd hedge, and I think we need clarity there. And the second thing we need is to recognize that young people have the movement that can make this possible. Look, the miracle is not that Bernie Sanders lost. The miracle is that he almost won. Yeah, he almost won. I was his co-chair. I was in Nevada. I thought he was going to be the nominee. And then they coalesced and they got everyone to drop and they got Clyburn to endorse him. And from Nate Silver giving him a 75% chance of winning, it went to a 30% chance in 3-4 days. I've never seen anything like it. He was up in the polls in California. He was up in the polls in Texas. He was going to win it on Super Tuesday. And they coalesced. They got everyone to drop. They anointed Biden. And that's how they won. But they can't keep doing that. You know, Bernie came closer in 20 than he did in 16. I think a progressive would have won this time if it was an open seat. Biden's running, an incumbent president is always very hard. You defer. I guarantee you that if you get a progressive, a strong progressive, running on this platform in 28, 32, 36, we can win, given what Bernie did. He climbed the mountain. We just have to get over it. And so my message to the young people is don't quit when you're at the 10-yard line. The hard work has been done.
I want to see if you could, I could get your assessment on the Republican Party right now in contrast to that, right? I mean, my view of it is that I have never seen them in such shambles, essentially. And I mean, they're always dysfunctional in their own way. But right now, with the government shutdown looming and Kevin McCarthy being threatened with essentially losing his gavel because of these extremist members of the Republican Party, saying if you work with the Democrats in the Senate, Biden, we're done with you, essentially. Like, how difficult is it to even engage with the Republicans on the other side of the aisle in the midst of just how they've kind of sunk to the bottom? They've reached where they always were deteriorating towards, and now they can't govern, to put it mildly.
It's very frustrating because this wing of the party it doesn't even rhetorically embrace the populism that Trump runs on. You know, if you actually wanted to build new factories, if you actually cared about the working class, you'd have to spend money to do that. You'd have to spend money for factories. You'd have to have investments in the working class. This party just wants to cut.
Yeah.
So what do they want to cut? They want to cut funding for childcare. They want to cut funding for rental assistance. At a time where you have a housing crisis, they're saying don't help people buy homes or get rental assistance. They want to cut funding for schools. And it's their whole mantra is cut that funding, and at the same time it's coupled with a nationalism. So it's very destructive. But what we need to counter it, in my view, is not just a status quo. Let's return to normal. Not just talking about the important freedoms, which are so important, reproductive rights and the threat on reproductive rights and voting rights, but a vision that says we understand that the American dream has slipped away. We can't turn back to normal. We have to have a transformational economic and political message. But the Republicans are, you know, they're just as grievance politics.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're seeing an end, at least for now, to bipartisanship as a shared norm. Obviously, there's some stuff that both sides work together on, but it seems like more and more Congress is just a site of willful obstructionism. The only time anything gets done is if it's absolutely necessary, and sometimes not even then. We're facing a government shutdown.
Right.
It's entirely possible things pan out really poorly for millions of workers.
Yeah.
You know, the degree of damage is potentially unimaginable. And all of this being done to, I mean, I've seen a number of proposals. Stop funding Ukraine, stop providing assistance there, you know, cut like 80% of the funding to low-income schools. It seems like, you know, we can get through this as long as people suffer. That seems to be the message. And it seems like through a lot of this, the Republicans are signaling, you know, maybe a loaded term, but fairly evil behavior. I think it goes beyond political unacceptability and trends into just a moral black hole. What a lot of people seem concerned with is that Democrats are aware of this, but maintain the norm of bipartisanship out of civility or concern for coming across like the lower of the two. They don't want to look like they're taking the low ground. But I think the Republicans have taken the lowest ground. Marjorie Taylor Greene was throwing around Hunter Biden photos on the right in the Congress floor not too long ago. It's bad out there, you know. Are the Dems willing to, I guess, acknowledge, because Biden still talks about like a strong Republican Party and the value of bipartisanship. How do we move forward from this?
Well, he started to call out Marjorie Taylor Greene and the extremism now, but we've got to be more bold about calling them out when they are denying climate science, when they are basically providing handouts to these defense industry, healthcare industry, pharmaceutical industry, when they're not even willing to fund government and keep it open, when they're hijacking the country and saying, unless you cut funding to our poorest schools, we're going to do that. We do have to be clearer. But I'll answer your question with this. People want this country to come together. They're desperate for that. They see 70, 80% approval, Republicans and Democrats, on paid family leave, on child care, on raising the wage, on supporting workers. And they're wondering, why isn't that translating into Congress? And I think what people need to do is stop the bipartisanship of sort of the no labels, which is a civility of the 80s and 90s under the status quo, and say, let's build a bipartisanship on structural reform of the economy and politics, a bipartisanship to get rid of PAC and lobbyist money, to ban stock trading, to have term limits. That can be bipartisan. A bipartisanship to say we shouldn't have foreign interventions in places with our military to get into endless wars. A bipartisanship to say that we've got to provide people with health care and free public college, which may not be in Congress. But there are a lot of Republicans who support Medicare for all. I saw that when I was out there with Bernie. There are a lot of Republicans who believe we need to tax the ultra wealthy more. So I think what people want is a politics that is transformational, and then a willingness to build a coalition with everyone. That may not include the current people in Congress who are over-influenced by lobbyists. We may need a new generation of elected leaders.
All right. Well, are we... I don't want to take up too much of your time, right? I was looking...
You do have a lot of work today.
There we go. Oh,
okay.
Sorry about that. Okay, I thought we were getting the signal to wrap.
Oh,
Apologies.
It's a madhouse in the Capitol building today. Who knows?
Who knows?
Going on?
Yes,
No,
exactly.
I wanted to follow through. I wanted to ask on that too. You know, you talk about conditional bipartisanship, which
Conditional. Yeah, that's it. You're good with these phrases, huh?
you know, we all
He's
talk.
the wordsmith, huh?
No, you got all the tough questions. The tough questions are the wordsmith.
Yeah,
But I think here's my hope with this. I'm not going to tell the senator who texted me saying, "Oh, Ro, this is great," because he saw the article of me doing this, and I invited him, and his schedule is busy. I think more people, Congress members and senators, need to come on forums like this to take tough questions. Right? When I've gone on MSNBC time and time again, I've never gotten asked about David Sachs. I've never gotten asked about where funding. Right? And people want these questions answered. I've never gotten asked about my vote on socialism. Right? And so the reason politicians don't come out to places like this is they don't want to do the tough questions. I know when I go on those channels what they're going to ask me. And if I make a point enough about hitting the Republicans, they'll be like, yay, Ro. And I think what people need to do is have honest conversations like this and take tough questions. And no one's perfect in the political system. You know, Bernie is probably as close as we got to being clean in terms of politics. But people want authenticity, and authenticity isn't a word. It means taking tough questions and giving real answers.
You ready for another tough one?
Yeah, sure.
You wrote a letter inviting Narendra Modi to speak, and I know that he's a far-right Hindu nationalist. He had at one point not even been allowed to come to the United States because of his role in the Gujarat killings, basically, and his sanctioning of that. What was behind that decision, given the fact that I think a lot of progressives feel that Narendra Modi is someone we shouldn't be doing business with?
Well, he's the elected Prime Minister of India. I was very critical after the Gujarat riots and spoke out vehemently against him and supported the decision to deny him a visa at the time, which was quite controversial. My public statements have been for pluralism in India, rejecting right-wing nationalism. I'm of Hindu faith and have been willing to do that, and actually was invited to the Islamic Society ISNA National Conference after I went to India in a bipartisan delegation to India, where we did meet the Prime Minister and met with the Foreign Minister, but I also met with Gandhi's great-grandson, and I met with, who was a dissident in the regime, and he tweeted out, I urge people to read what he said, and I met with Muslims in Haryana whose homes were being demolished, and I met with people in Manipur who were facing threats of nationalism against pluralism. I guess my view is India is a huge democracy, a huge country that's an ally, and it's better to be in the room engaging while raising human rights than not engaging the prime minister or others. And people can make a decision. There were 9 members who boycotted that speech to Congress. I said I respect their decision, but I want certain progressive voices to not boycott themselves, to be part of that conversation, to be meeting the prime minister and others and raising human rights. And Jasmine Crockett will tell you we directly raised with the foreign minister, with the prime minister, those human rights concerns in our meetings, and the press in India covered it. My view is that also can bring change.
That's a really difficult line to walk as well. You know, as the United States, we have enormous foreign influence, which has been used in the past to a great amount of harm. Nowadays, of course, we're not toppling socialist regimes day in and day out. That's great. I'm glad we changed that. But even now, you know, we cast a wide wake in our shadow. In speaking with Modi, maybe we enable, you know, certain tendencies or, you know, promote them in a kind of indirect legitimacy way. Donald Trump met with, you know, Kim Jong-un, for example. So, right, there's a wide spectrum of stuff like that going on. But I was wondering, from your opinion, because you have spoken out on foreign policy issues so many times, how is America supposed to tread carefully in an era where we're more responsible in how we deal with other countries, but also trying to promote good foreign policy abroad? For instance, we engage favorably with Saudi Arabia, despite their many, many human rights abuses. We don't with Iran. They do bad things too. What can we do to promote goodness abroad without, I guess, browbeating other countries with our economic and cultural power?
Well, first we have to model the best behavior in the United States by being for voting rights, by being for reproductive rights, by saying that we're not bashing immigrants, to really show what it is like to be the great, cohesive, multiracial democracy that America uniquely can be, and to be that vision for the world. So we've got to first start by doing that here at home. That's the most powerful thing that we can do. Second, while we want to lead in the world, recognizing that our values of pluralism and human rights are critical in shaping a rules-based world, we want to have enough humility. We want to know that, you know, there's some of these countries have been generations removed from colonialism, and that it can't come off as preaching. It's got to come off as here are universal standards that we have a coalition of nations that believe in, that we need to work towards. Sometimes I think if it comes off as hectoring, you're going to have countries just say, well, why should we care? What are we going to how are we going to advance human rights? So I think it has to be strategic. And then third, we do have to provide an important role for our values. So we shouldn't just have economics dictate everything, which is too easy to do. But it's a very difficult question.
All right.
It certainly is.
Representative Khanna, we've got to wrap. Really appreciate your content. Thank you for your candor.
It's been a delight to speak
with you.
Yes,
really
thank
appreciate it. Thank you.
We are
live, as it happens. Hello. Here we are in scenic. What city is this?
Washington, D.C.
Oh,
one
that's
for one.
true. Yeah. We just had Congressman Khanna on talking about, well, a number of things, but mostly, I think, how to get people engaged. Vote Dems, ideally. I'm sure we all have somewhat aligned views on that. But to kick things off, I wanted to talk about something that, at the very least, I know you and I have worked on. Progressive Victory, the fine people who set all this up. They're a canvassing org that we've thrown people towards as streamers. And as a result of that, thousands of folks have gone on out and canvassed. It's given me a lot of hope for, I guess, live streaming or new media as a mechanism for political onboarding. I was just curious what everyone's thoughts were on that with regards to like the new path forward.
You guys tell me, because I don't know what the young people are up to nowadays.
I feel like the
Vaping, yeah, I do know. I've seen that.
I feel like the two important things for people are, if you're in the online content space, the rhetoric about like Dems and Republicans being the same has to stop. It's absolutely patently ridiculous. If you look at voting records, if you look at stance on issues, Democrats and Republicans stand in stark opposition to one another. So I think it's important to make it seem like voting for Democrats are a worthwhile proposition, if for no other reason because of the composition of the Supreme Court. And then I think the second thing that's important is to make it seem like there is actual change that can happen if you engage with the system. And I feel like too many people are so quick to throw in the towel and say like, well, you know, it doesn't matter who you vote for, it doesn't matter what happens, it's all politicians, it's all the same game at the end of the day, everybody has corporate buyers and lobbyists and blah, blah, blah. And I think at the end of the day, when you consume enough of that media, you feel like, why does it matter? Like, why engage at all? And that's really frustrating to me to say those two things. On a third thing, too, it's hard to encourage this as a streamer because we are so national or international with our outreach. Getting more engaged at the local level, it's so easy to get engaged and see real, tangible results from your actions than trying to engage at the national level where it's like, I threw $5 at AOC, and now I don't really know, what my impact is beyond that,
I mean, yeah, certainly. I think that it's very important to make sure that your political engagement does not end with just voting, right? Like, voting for Democrats is essentially, it's essential, right? You have to do that. You have to vote for Democrats in general elections. I do believe that. But at the same time, that is one of, like, the least, it's the least you can do with political engagement, right? Get involved locally, as you said. Get involved with your local DSA, because if it's just about electoralism, you're going to feel a little bit alienated, right? Because you're not Biden. For most young people, he doesn't represent them. Like, he doesn't necessarily connect with them. And that's why voting, I would imagine, or I would advocate, should be something that you do, but not necessarily where your political engagement ends.
I agree with that, but I would say that voting is the most important thing, and almost nothing else matters if you're not willing to vote. There's way too much like online activism. It happens in the streamer world, happens in the YouTube world, it happens on Twitter. You can tweet all you want, but at the end of the day, lawmakers, rightfully so, only respond to what voters want. Their constituents are the people that actually go to the polls and vote for them. There's a reason why, criminal justice looks the way it does in the United States, and it's because the demographic of people voting are not the demographic of people that are most often impacted by the criminal justice system. And I think that, when we say like voting is the least we can do, I mean, young people don't do it. Like, they don't vote. Like, and if you're not willing to vote, like, nobody's going to, and they shouldn't listen to you, because at the end of the day, a politician's job is to get reelected. And if you're not going to go out and actually show up and vote for said politicians, why should they ever listen to anything you have to say?
Yeah, and the NLRB and the FTC right now are probably the best cases to make that point, that politics and elections actually do matter. Because if you're somebody who says, well, actually, the only thing I care about is, organizing Starbucks or organizing Amazon or supporting like the UAW, if you don't have a National Labor Relations Board that is supportive of labor rights, it's going to be a much tougher climb. And even when it comes to antitrust and monopoly, that touches everything. Like, the inability of people to make any significant revenue on podcasts is all about antitrust. The inability of people to kind of speak freely is related to the power of Silicon Valley that is now being contested by Joe Biden's FTC because he won and because he appointed people like Lena Khan. I think people like trash vote blue no matter who all the time, but there's actually, if you're on in the progressive wing of the party, I've often seen that kind of used in reverse, in that, let's say you get John Fetterman across the finish line in Pennsylvania, like he won a primary against a right-wing Democrat. Because vote blue no matter who exists, all of the kind of conservative Democrats in the state were like, all right, I'm voting for John Fetterman.
Yeah.
And actually, AOC gets knocked a lot for that mama bear comment that she made about Pelosi.
Well, it was true.
She said that at the time where it looked like Bernie was going to seize the nomination. And so what she was trying to do is say, like, look, Bernie's going to be the nominee.
Right.
Pelosi is supportive of whoever the nominee is. Everyone else then needs to get behind Bernie, and you kind of use that vote blue no matter who momentum to say, look, you don't have a choice. He's the blue. So guess what? Vote for him. You're a socialist now.
100%. I mean, and by the true part, I just meant to say that, like, Nancy Pelosi, for all of her faults, she always had an ability to reach a bunch of different people in the caucus, right? And she developed those kinds of relationships, including with AOC. I thought what you were going to say was that some of the left online criticized the fact that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was using her excess fundraising money to help other Democrats in more vulnerable positions. And I found that criticism to be quite silly, because that's an exercise in leverage, right? And she's using her political capital to get something done behind the scenes. And just because we don't see it in public, you're going to hear about that maybe in a year or so. Or you may never hear about some of the gains that she gets. But that's kind of the stuff that we don't see that happens when you actually have people who are sane in the positions of power. And Lena Khan, I mean, what is this? The best FTC chair that we've seen in
Certainly
decades?
most aggressive, yeah.
I mean, what, since the 60s or whatever? Same in terms of Biden's posture towards labor. So it's not about voting for the person like they're a celebrity. We're not electing class president.
Right, and it doesn't mean you endorse the drug war because you voted for Joe Biden.
This isn't The Bachelor, where you're not picking somebody to marry. You're picking somebody who's a figurehead. And all of the people that come along with that person, the people that are, heading those agencies, that's what you have to keep in mind. So it's this whole, it's broadening elections outside of celebrity to coalitions.
Yeah, and if you really don't like Manchin and Sinema, if you don't like these Democrats that sit right on the edge, the easiest way to take power from them isn't to primary them, it's to just have more Democrats in office. If there are 55, 57, 60 blue senators, Manchin and Sinema don't matter as much anymore because we don't need to appeal to them, to that very center-leaning, center-right-leaning political or economic agenda in order to get what we want through the Senate.
Although in some cases you can primary. If the Democrat is likely to win the general election, like in Arizona, then you can primary Sinema and Ruben Gallego.
Maybe Sinema.
In Arizona, maybe, but in West Virginia...
West Virginia, forget about it.
Well, primaries have value.
Arizona's kind of wacky, though, but yeah.
The more democracy that exists, I think, is the better. And primaries have value in terms of also pushing incumbents where they don't feel too cozy, they don't feel like they can rest on their laurels and not represent people anymore.
I think, we're talking about electoralism, which is of course vital, but I think that at the fundamental, personal level, so often it's about convincing a person that what they can do can make a difference, on any level. I saw the most incredible statistic the other day. Apparently something like 60% of the book bans in this country, school boards banning this because they mention gay people in it or something, all that. There's been thousands of them, right? 60% of them from 11 people. Just very dedicated folks calling around. They're not in the district, they're just calling around, making a fuss, traveling. It is remarkable, especially at a local level, how much single people can do.
I've heard stories of housing developments held up because one old lady goes to every single city council meeting. She knows every single person on the board and she's always giving speeches. There's a joke I tell on my stream. There's a stoplight outside my house that I hated, and they were finally marking the stoplight for deletion. And I remember one day this lady knocked on my door and she had a little petition to sign to save the stoplight. And I'm like, no, this stoplight is the dumbest stoplight in the world. I'm so glad it's changing stop signs. I have a son. I walk into school. It's not a dangerous intersection. And I kind of laughed it off and she walked away or whatever. And 2 weeks later, God damn it, she saved the goddamn stoplight. Yeah, I couldn't believe it. I was like, oh my God, I should have been running a counter petition. But there is an ungodly amount of power available, but it's at the local level. And that's not sexy. Everybody wants to talk about Biden and Ukraine and AOC and that's it. And then it's well, who's your mayor? What do you do locally? Because that's where just 5 or 10 people can sometimes exert massive influence on some of your policies. But it's just not, it's not talked about on Twitter as much, so nobody goes for it as much.
You go to almost any city, and the downtown area is almost completely controlled civically by city councilors who are in the suburbs. So to them, it's just a shopping destination. But for 100,000 people, it's home. And there's this disconnect. And it's almost always because the people in the suburbs are old and retired and have the time to run and the money to run, and they show up. And that is to their benefit, but there's nothing about that isn't transferable to a young, just out of college, sort of entrepreneurial, engaged activist. It can be done, but a lot of people, especially on the left, it's not that they set their hopes too high. Hope should be high. But the expectations of what any individual can do, I think a lot of people are touting around, historical revolutionary dreams, when in reality, the real way you get power in this country and in any situation is by knowing who your local councilors are and calling them often enough to be annoying. That showing up is 90% of political power. And a lot of people don't want to do that because it's not sexy. And I think that making that sexy, or at least convincing people it's worthwhile, that's a really big part of it.
I also wish for a lot of far left, because I've probably fought with all of you at some point over far left activism online. I wish that instead of...
I don't even... I'm sorry.
Instead of... You might not know me, but okay. Instead of pushing... Sure.
He owned you so hard you forgot
Absolutely, yeah. Lots of Twitter clips.
No, I know you debated Sam, but I don't really know anything else.
Sure, it's possible. Yeah.
I don't remember any fight.
Okay, that's all good. You drank a lot, I guess. No. Instead of or, I wish it could just be and. Like, instead of looking at, well, the mainstream Dems won, it's either them or my progressives, and since they won, now I'm checked out of the process. Like, how many people were disillusioned after Bernie lost, and it's like, oh, superdelegates suck, and the system sucks, and then you disengage. I wish there was more of like a, it's good to vote blue and to get Dems in, and we need to build on this and move it further left than, say, somebody like me would want. But moving and moving and moving while still supporting the establishment, rather than being like, well, if the establishment is winning, I don't want anything to do with it. I'm going to unplug completely until I get like my ideal socialist revolution or progressive revolution or whatever. I think that disconnect is just so cancerous for young people. Like I don't want to make Feinstein jokes here, but like if young people voted, the composition of Congress would be way different, right? It would be way, way, way different if the electorate was more evenly composed of all the age groups rather than skewing so heavily towards only older people that's going to be more, like you said, live in the suburbs and are more plugged in. And yeah.
What I'd say to that is that those young people that you're talking about who got disaffected by the results of the 2016 primary, they're not an organized bloc. They're not really a thing. They're a lot of people who have, ideas about things. The party establishment is an organized thing, and so in that sense, between those two groups, the party establishment has a lot more agency. They can organize together. They can meet, and they can decide how they're going to interact with their, at that point, junior coalition partner member. They decided through 2016 that they were going to, treat them like, crap, and they then paid a price for it. So you can say that, well, people should be bigger than that and not worry about how they're treated. And okay, fine, that's legit. But at the same time, if you have something within your control, you got to do better than that. And and I think the party establishment has learned, like the way that the party establishment, Schumer in particular, even Hakeem Jeffries since he became House leader, has not been going to war against the kind of grassroots base on the left in the way that he used to. He even has told AIPAC to back off of going after the squad. Part of that is the squad being much more team players than they started out as. But that doesn't explain Schumer. Schumer too has just been close friends with Bernie, and so it doesn't create the opportunity for people to be furious at the establishment.
Well, speaking of Schumer, this is a bit of a left turn, but what is your assessment, Ryan, as a reporter, you can put on your hat a little bit here, reporter cap, about Schumer's reticence to get Menendez to resign? Do you think that we're talking about a massive 2024 election where it's likely Biden versus Trump, and a lot of the thrust of what Democrats will argue, is that Trump is corrupt, he can't be trusted. It undercuts it a little bit if Menendez is hanging by a thread in the Senate. Why hasn't Schumer called on him to resign?
I think he thinks that this will work itself out eventually.
Yeah.
At his press conference on Tuesday, he said Menendez is going to be here speaking to the caucus Wednesday. We'll see how that goes, and then I'll talk about it afterwards. Didn't go great, but he's just trying to put it off. He hopes that it will, I think, resolve itself. The fact that they're all in the tri-state delegation and have 40 years of experience together, God knows what kind of relationship they've had over the years.
Yeah.
There's also the personal, they've obviously just known each other for that
between
entire
Feinstein
time.
and Menendez.
Yes.
It's
puts them down to 49.
It's looking a little dicey over
if he
there.
Resigns.
I mean, honestly, Senate congeniality is a freaking disease. The idea that these massive decisions are being made based on personal relationships in this way. Say what you want about the House, but at least there's this more semblance of direct democracy there and a bit more accountability. Because it's incredibly frustrating, I think, for people talking about alienating voters. How recalcitrant the Senate is enormously, I think, demobilizing, especially when you can't get anything past the filibuster unless it's some sort of budgetary measure.
I think that's part of why people talk about the effectiveness of a lawmaker, because to some extent politics is it's a game that you play. It's a skill that you exercise. It's not just a matter of well, I'm going in today to vote for exactly what my constituents want, because if you play it in that way, other senators that are working kind of more on these interpersonal relationships are probably going to have an edge in terms of different types of legislation or different types of deals that they're making on the floor. I understand the frustration, but I think that's probably just an inevitable part of any republic, of anything. We've got representatives going in and voting, even on local levels. Those interpersonal relationships are really important for, in some ways it's negative because it feels, like you said, it's alienating. Well, why isn't he representing me? he's friends with this guy for 40 years. I guess screw me, right? But then in another way, ideally in an ideal world, there are people that are able to cut deals or push people a little bit more because of those relationships they have. So, but
though towards like authenticity, it is worth noting, of course, that there are, just the other day, at the same time that Democratic senators were increasing in number with calls for Menendez to resign, House Republicans on the impeachment inquiry committee were publicly saying that they would not support like following through on any criminal condemnations of Donald Trump following guilty verdicts in the indictment. So like while in the House the Republicans are just like, we don't believe in the rule of law. At least there's something here. I mean, Menendez, it's like a cartoon character, right? He's got like gold bars stuffed in the lining of his coat. It's like spilling out of his pockets as he runs out. So it's an easy target, Even any condemnation puts us ahead of the Republicans, but obviously, it should be a clear shot. Though, again, with the Senate being so weak, or like our hold on the Senate being so weak at the moment, I guess I can understand some degree of recalcitrance. It's just
well, it's like,
not...
but Jersey has a Democratic governor.
Oh, no, it would,
and so does California. Like, most of this is just them being these, like, them thinking that, I mean, I joke about how the Supreme Court thinks they're the high priests of the United States. I mean, the Senate feels like they act as if they're, I don't know, some sort of member of
the Supreme Chamber,
the clergy or something like that.
The upper part of the Congress, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it should go the way of the House of Lords in the UK and just basically be ornamental.
Do your guys viewers know that he was already indicted?
Yes.
In 20,
He made history. He's the first senator
in
the history
technicality,
of the United States to be charged with, while in office, with 2 separate criminal indictments. And knowing the history of the U.S., like going back to the 1800s, that really is a record-breaking performance.
I
mean,
kind of
honestly
respect it, honestly. It's so straightforward. It's cartoonish, there's no subtlety.
Yes.
It's just a clear layup, get off in a technicality, gold bars, whatever. It's no surprise young people have trouble feeling like there's any kind of meaningful inroad to political engagement here, when it does feel like, you know who you know, and that's politics. It's not entirely true, right? I mean, Bernie did a lot running, as a Democrat from independent, but it's just so hard. I see all the Twitter engagement, right? All the lefties, both parties are the same, like you said, that rhetoric. People are very, very, very quick to distrust. You mentioned the AOC, the money going around to help other weaker candidates. They see that as a sign of corruption somehow. Any connection, any tie, any engagement with people who aren't completely pure. Hell, Bernie endorsing Biden, that was seen as a sign of weakness. Now, I understand oppositional politics to a degree, but we have to work along a little, to some extent at least. I just don't know how to best sell people on that, that coalition mindset, that you can actually do work from one side of it rather than just being the totality.
I think it's also important to note that, like, while on social media, it feels like, depending on the bubbles you inhabit, a lot of it looks like leftist infighting depending on the circles that you're in. The leftist infighting on the left is largely still, I think, like a figment of social media. But the infighting on the right, the Republican Party is legitimately threatening to tear itself apart under the weight of God knows what all the Donald Trump stuff is, the however many different charges he's facing, the fact that he's still so far ahead in the Republican nomination process, and the fact that there are still like a decent number of Republicans that won't support him. It only takes 5 or 10% to effectively destroy the Republican Party to pull away from him. That whole process is going to be
great
amazing.
Time to be alive.
Yeah, maybe. Well, there's still there's the hellscape future where Trump wins the election somehow.
It's over. It's Jover even. Yeah. I lose joke at that.
I feel like the fact that so many people still support him is almost like on it's Jover territory. That's unbelievable.
It's like you can't. This is why Joe Biden's approval ratings are low, right? It's because you can be a Dem who will vote for him, but not approve of him. Like, if you ask me, do I approve of him? Oh, no, because he's not, a communist or whatever. But I'll vote for him. I'll advocate for him. Whereas with Donald Trump, the line between, or the Venn diagram of supports and will vote for, it's one. There's one circle, Yeah. Very little dissonance there.
There is 10% or so of Trump supporters who will say, yes, I believe he's guilty and should be in prison.
Yeah.
And then will also vote for him.
Incredible brains.
Yes.
I mean, many people are saying he's the Eugene Debs of the 21st century. But I mean, honestly, like that does bring up something interesting here, because Biden's approval ratings are really low, but that's not translating to Democrats at the polling not what polling locations, but you know what I mean. In
Yeah,
these
special elections.
Special elections, right? And even in 2022, normally, like in 2010, when there was this big backlash to Obama, that was not seen in 2022. And I just think it's a really fascinating dynamic to unpack, how Biden's presidency and his approval numbers appear to be a bit untethered from Democrats and the negative partisanship that they're able to engender when Trump comes up, right? Curious about any of your guys' thoughts on that front.
Abortion rights, I think.
Right.
I think if you don't have Roe overturned, then you're not seeing the overperformance in special elections that you have now. But what it did is it.
Do you think January 6th too?
A little.
Yeah.
Yes, like that helped congeal the already partisan stew that was cooking at that time. But I think putting abortion rights on the ballot in a way that they hadn't been before, like Republicans had always said, like basically abortion rights are on the ballot. We're going to elect us. We're going to appoint judges that are going to overturn Roe v. Wade, and that drove out their voters. Democrats were they felt the whole issue was icky and wouldn't talk about it. Mm-hmm. And also Democratic voters are so used to hearing Democrats like cry wolf about, George H.W. Bush was going to be like the one that ended democracy or something. So like saying like every 4 years saying that like Roe is going to be overturned fell flat, even though it was true under Trump in 2016. Now nobody can question whether or not it's on the ballot. In some states it's quite literally on the ballot in terms of a ballot measure. In Virginia in a couple weeks, Youngkin, if he gets a trifecta, he'll be under pressure to push abortion restrictions. Basically any place at this point, the vote, your vote has something to do with abortion rights, and so you're like, you know what, I don't care about anything else, but I do care about this, and that's enough to bump that number up.
Really quick point, and then go ahead, Vaush, but that also really undercuts Trump needs more suburban women to come after him if he wants to win in 2024, and this does not help him. Go ahead.
No, I completely agree. Yeah, it feels like for the longest time, corporate politics were always on the table, but for a lot of culture issues, it was always play fighting, right? Oh, they're going to revoke Roe v. Wade. Oh, they're going to overturn democracy. Oh, that, and like maybe, but eh. And then in I guess, I don't know, 2016, 2017, whenever it became apparent, someone threw an actual punch, and it's like, oh,
you're really going to do this.
Yeah, okay, all right.
Also, a really unlucky confluence of stupid things. Of RBG not retiring when she should have, of Merrick Garland, which we'll never get revenge for, not that I'm a big fan of revenge politics, but that we actually lost a Supreme Court pick that was like doofully Barack Obama's. Like these things coming together, and then Donald Trump getting so many Supreme Court justices was incredibly unlucky, and then
thank God he's a completely ineffective president, or he might have done real damage during his first term. I mean, maybe second term he does more. I don't want to give him the chance. It's just. Yeah, I don't know. Young people get this, I think, because young people now, they're growing up in a world where there was no play fighting. At least, somebody's like 18 now. For their whole cognizant life, it's been real. But for a lot of older people, that's one of those criticisms of the Dems, right?
It's been really real for millennials. God damn, I graduated high school in 2007. So we entered, a lot of us got into college, and then like right off the back of like the huge recession, which was crazy, and then now there's fucking COVID, and Jesus Christ, Yeah,
if you take a look at the median wealth distribution across generations, it's like right after Gen X, and Gen X doesn't have it great either, but after them, it's like falling off a cliff, any millennial, Gen Z, now Gen Alpha, I mean, the only wealthy people from these generations are live streamers and crypto grifters, it seems. Outside of that, long-standing, successful family-building careers are few and far between, and I think that's really reflected in the hopelessness and ennui of the generations.
You forgot to add people that don't buy avocado toast.
Oh, obviously, right.
Yeah.
And people who stay with their folks till they're 30.
Is that going to change if these kids start, they're in their 30s now, start inheriting money, like there's their parents?
I hope
great
it doesn't.
boomer die-off. We're finally waiting. It's finally almost around the corner. I feel like we've been talking about it for like 15 years.
Speaking of play fighting,
is the big boomer die-off. That's going to be like and also like a huge demographic change.
What does that do to the structural politics?
I hope it doesn't. We've seen that, like, they're not shifting rightward the way people, like, generations trend towards when they get older. And obviously, like, there's a systemic issue here, right? You know, you can fix it with one big cash grab for a generation, or some of them at least, but then the next generation's going to have the same issue. A lot of this ties back to housing. Nobody can afford houses right now. Nobody.
Yeah,
Like, zero people can afford houses.
City planning is like this intractable problem that nobody seems to be able to get right. And I think even if you look at like California, you've got like, what was that $1 billion train line to nowhere? Like, if even in some of these like left-leaning places, we can't figure out good city planning, good public transport, every place is becoming increasingly unaffordable.
Billions spent on high-speed rail, not even broken ground.
And
Just
there's so much like
a void.
There's a lot of conflicting pressure too on housing prices, where people are asking for basically contrary things without realizing it. Like, housing is becoming increasingly unaffordable because there are so few houses available. People want student debt forgiveness so they can afford houses, which would just drive housing prices up if every student had an extra $20,000 to buy houses. You know, interest rates are finally going up, which are making houses unaffordable, but it's supposed to drive down demand. Like, the housing market is just in a super huge mess right now, and we're trying to combat it with so many tools beyond just like what we really need is really just like the aggressive rezoning of housing districts.
The Times had an article the other day that said that Tokyo has built more units in the last couple decades than exist in total in New York City.
Yeah,
and
not even surprising.
And as a result, people say, well, it doesn't have anything to do with the price. As a result, it's actually affordable to live in Tokyo. Like, you can,
Like, Tokyo is the only city in the world that has managed to. Japan has a really aggressive housing policy for Tokyo. Yeah.
We need to repeal the Faircloth Amendment. I mean, that AOC kind of had I think a bill that came up in 2018.
What's that one do?
That's the one that bans basically all federal funding for public housing, and it's been in place since 1998. Yep, that was a good Clinton special, right, for the neoliberal turn, and it's just still been.
Did she sort of repealed it or something? I remember it coming up.
Bernie and her were working together on it, and then I just think it died. I don't remember. I mean, it's difficult, obviously, to get anything through the Senate, anything like that's not budgetary related.
I think it's really funny how this was framed as like a coastal elite problem, LA, New York, whatever, and then in 3 years, housing prices in Florida have gone up like 40% or whatever.
Alabama, I think, is up like 20% a year over year for like 4 years in a row.
Everywhere you move to, it was framed as like, oh, it's California, and it is to an extent, but it will be everywhere. Everywhere short of like Wyoming, and probably even there is going to have this issue. It's really just we somehow coordinate massive rezoning across the country at a local level, or some kind of federalized, subsidized housing, preferably better than the ones we've tried before. You know, those weren't great. Or, you know,
and you could make federal money available to cities that fixed their problem.
Better that than highways.
Yeah,
people are tearing down their highways.
You fix your zoning problem. You crush your NIMBYs. Then you get free housing.
Yeah, I feel like
there's only enough for 10 cities. And everybody go.
I feel like the issue that you run into, though, is this feels like a huge, like an external failure of democracy, and that all of your voters that are your strongest voting base in these cities are the ones that are most incentivized to vote against like new housing. Because like the people that are most harmed by lack of available housing in any particular city are future residents, are people that could move in and take advantage of lower prices that are now not able to. And then if you are living in a suburb in California, goddamn, I lived in Glendale, Culver City, Huntington Beach. There are so many of these places where you're in an apartment and like across the street from you are these like borderline dilapidated houses that sell for like $750,000 each, and it's like these people don't want to see high density, housing go up. These people don't want to see all these condos or all these new apartments go up because now it's going to threaten their property value. So I feel like you run into a weird conflict of interest there, where you're incentivized as somebody that is in that area to vote down and to be a NIMBY, like you actually are rewarded for it. I don't know what
the good news is we won't have any homeowners pretty soon.
Yeah, wow.
It'll just be two.
Just renters.
Well, I mean, or you could
Vanguard and BlackRock or whatever.
I mean, you could just Prop 13 your way away from property taxes, so people would just stay in their house forever and then never have to deal with it.
Well, another big one is the if you own it can't be treated as a speculative investment. If you own a property and no one's using it, like you're waiting to sell it off, or that just it can't be allowed. Tax it so heavily that they have to put it out. Lower the prices. There's no ideal here, right? Like the ideal is everyone just acts in their best interest, and all the young people go out and do the city council voting. But like this is an unworkable problem.
Right,
like no one can afford anything right now.
Right now, you've got private equity with cash making a bid on, say, a $500,000 house. They have the cash; so they don't have to take any. They don't have to pay the 7% mortgages. And then you have it against a person who managed to scrape together a down payment, and then has to pay a 7% interest rate. Like that's an unfair fight. The homeowner is going to take the cash offer every single time. And so,
and private equity is buying up a
buying
ton of
everything.
apartments in New York City. My apartment complex got bought by a private equity firm
just
during
sits empty.
COVID.
they're going to own like half of the housing
and they
stock
treat us
within
like
10 years if we don't
garbage.
stop.
Like
Yeah.
they don't repair anything, and we can't get through to them. I mean, that's a whole nother saga. But
They probably want you to leave so they
oh
can
yes,
like
well
renovate
it's
and
rent
then
it's
upsell.
rent controlled. So
Right.
they want me to leave anyway. But Ryan, I actually was reminded when you're talking about a piece you wrote a few years ago that still sticks in the back of my mind about the potential commercial housing bubble. That is also something that we should monitor because private equity was also and venture capital, I believe, buying up a ton of those commercial real estate properties, and they were pretty overinflated, if my recollection serves me.
That was before the pandemic.
Yeah, like, do you have any updates on that?
People who watch that are just deeply frightened. They're like, this is
Yeah.
the CMBS, the commercial mortgage-backed security market, it has like so many of these traders scared. Is it going to be another like
Yeah.
mortgage-backed security meltdown like we had in 2007? What they're trying to do now is turn them into residential properties, and all different Fed action is trying to like keep the bubble from bursting. But you're in New York, you're seeing a lot of that, right? They're turning them into half residential buildings or something.
Yeah.
The issue's been exacerbated heavily by everyone working at home too. So you go downtown and you see like rows and rows of dead empty corporate office buildings and like for lease available in every commercial and office district. And then you go check Zillow and like, a house that was $150,000 10 years ago is now.
Those are the interest groups
quadruple
that are also pushing people to return to work, get back into the office. These real estate groups
More
that
rent.
don't. That, yeah, right.
A lot of these are 5 and 10 year leases, so it holds off the calamity a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, this is an
Oh,
issue.
good. Holds off the calamity.
Yeah, I understand people want to rail against like private equity or large firms buying up houses and everything. I feel like this is a small issue. I know that people like to fixate on it, but the only reason why private equity goes after this property is because it's so goddamn lucrative, because there are so few housing units available. People want to fight when it comes to the housing issue. It's like one of those things that appears simple, and then when you read more, it's really complicated. But then I think when you read more, it's actually really simple. Like the only way that housing ever gets fixed in the United States or in any part of the Western world is to build more units. Rent control.
Or to decommodify it.
No, decommodification doesn't create more space, though. You have to have more places for people to live. Like rent control has been thoroughly studied as a horrible way of trying to continue like housing stuff. Like building like luxury condos is good for everybody because people move up into other condos and make stuff available for people. You can get rid of private equity, but there's still going to be people that buy houses. You can try to get rid of like all landlords, but there's still going to be a lot of people chasing these few units. I think it's at the end of the day, it's more a physics problem than any type of economic problem. You just have a lot of people that want to live in an area with not enough houses available. And as long as we keep trying to like nibble at the edges by going after like vacant units, of which there are very few of in the actually like highly populated areas, or going after like private equity who are only making money because there's so few units available, or like by trying to decommodify housing.
But I think it's both too, because of the political economy. Because think about it, if that little lady had that much power to save the stoplight, if private equity rolls everything up and is benefiting from low housing supply, private equity also owns most of Washington. So
Yeah,
they're
but
going to be able to
homeowners-
stop the solution that you want.
Homeowners benefit from low housing supply too, though. That's the issue.
But there aren't
right?
going to. But the people owning homes will be a minority pretty soon. So there'll be fewer people benefiting. It'll just be
Possibly.
private equity.
Yeah, I guess it depends on.
I mean, that's the direction of the chart.
Sure.
There's no way out of this besides upzoning. That's like an inevitable. I mean, behind us right now, I grew up in LA. Most of it's single-family homes. Every separate home is separated by a 5-mile plane of road and grass that dies in the summer and the fall and the spring now. As a lot of it's also city planning. We build our city so you have wide swaths of residential, and then everyone wants to shop right here, which means a lot of people got to drive there. You don't have these issues to the same extent in like Paris. Relative to population density, you want to go somewhere in Paris, you're above a coffee shop. There's something. That's not a suburban flavor. I think so many of these issues, it seems so difficult to solve because once you start talking about redesigning cities, this is no longer a federal issue. You can offer money, but at the end of the day, I mean, a big mobilization campaign to get 5 million young people to go to their local city council meetings? There's an upper limit in terms of like immediate action, but we need that,
Yeah.
Although we are redesigning the cities at least because we're being forced to since the commercial buildings are.
Yeah, Seattle's been building a
Becoming
ton of
useless.
apartments lately. They're all over the place, the constructs, and it's great. I love seeing that,
Like every time I've been to Seattle, there's like 500 cranes in the air every time I'm driving around.
I
I
love
don't know
it.
what they're doing, but there's always a lot over there. Yeah.
Well, it's good. I mean, honestly, making more commercial real estate spaces, hopefully, in urban centers for people to live in, just would accelerate something that I would like to see happen, to make sure that some place like New York City isn't just Disney World for tourists, and when you go in to see a show or bridge and tunnelers and coming in and like, you know, I don't want to see a homeless person, that might make me uncomfortable, and they actually become livable spaces where people can afford to be. I think that's one of the biggest problems with housing, and it's just creating, as Ryan has been delineating, an entire generation of renters.
It's a big sell for decommodification too. We know housing first policies work for homeless people, like on average getting them off the street, and it's economically beneficial in the long run. And we also don't want to set things up so that you have like a dense urban core where all the cool stuff is, and you build new housing, but it's like an hour out. So you create like this sort of like scaled out issue where all the poor people have 4-hour commutes to get into their janitorial jobs. It's really difficult. Why did we decide to talk about the difficult problem?
I don't know.
There's no like easy conclusion. Hey,
there's some easy problems.
How about shutting down the government? Let's not. What about that? That's good, huh?
Yeah. I mean, it's hard for me to frickin' even keep track. McCarthy's not bringing that continuing resolution to the floor, right?
They're going to do it.
They are?
No, I mean, they're going to shut it down.
Oh, no, they're going to shut it down.
I'm going to be stuck in the airport for like 12 hours trying to get back.
Is Biden actually going to take that damn meeting with McCarthy? I really hope he doesn't.
I don't know. He probably will. He's that kind of a guy.
I know he is that kind of guy. I know, but let the Republicans are reneging on the deal that they made back with the debt ceiling. It's
historically, who is usually held responsible for a shutdown? Is it always like
Republicans?
Always Republicans?
Yeah.
No, I'm not asking who's actually at fault. I'm saying in terms of voter base, voters
Yes.
hold. Okay, yeah.
Same thing with the impeachment on Biden, and it's going to be the Clinton effect, hopefully.
It's desperation. I think they're running on fumes right now, right? The polling shows that the trans culture war stuff ain't working too well when it comes to mobilizing voters because it's marginal, you know?
You can only go through so many years which ironically, funny, we talked earlier about like Biden's approval rating. I think one of the things that Biden has kind of done well is we went from probably the most inflammatory president ever to like the most chillest and least polarized. Like, I don't know anybody that like really strongly supports Biden or really strongly hates Biden. He just kind of like does his thing. I think that's why the Republicans have kind of had to turn to like trans issues and other things to fight for so long.
Yeah, he's difficult to hate, which actually was a pretty good move, I guess. You know, it's one like
partly it was not being black.
Oh, for sure. Oh, it's so. I mean, he's like old, white,
and not being a woman.
80-year-old. Yeah. He's a very difficult person to attack on a personal or like civil bias.
I call him anodyne. I feel like that's the best way to describe.
Yeah, and it's why they go after Hunter so much as well, because like you look at Joe and he's smiling and he's old.
Oh, Hunter's hard to hate too. You're like, just
he's a badass.
Feel pathetic
for
about
cool
it.
people.
All right, we're getting the wrap. We're getting the wrap. Anyway, appreciate it, Ryan Grimm, Vaush, and. I'm so sorry, I'm so bad with names.
Don't worry about it.
Okay, Stephen.
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
Well, I like to shake hands. It's been such a pleasure to speak with you.
Yes.
Likewise.
Oh, here,
Thank you. Nice to meet you. Yes. Thank you. Oh.
You can do it. And then us. And we finished.
Nice.
We did it.
Yeah.
Solving at least one DC problem.
Yes, there
right
we
here.
go. Perfect.
There you go.
Thank you.
Cool.
All right, we are back. I'm Ryan Grimm, joined here by Destiny and Congressman Khanna, who left to go vote to try to keep the government open.
Unsuccessful.
Failed.
Unsuccessful.
Tell us about what was the mood in the room. So basically, the Republicans had their own bill that was going to keep the government open, but they were going to strip wokeism out of the world.
As you put it,
yes.
What did you say? Wokeism one.
Wokeism one. Republicans zero.
Yeah.
So they went down. They couldn't even get Republicans to get on their extreme bill.
Because the cuts were so drastic. I mean, cutting funding for poor schools, cutting nutrition, cutting heating assistance, cutting.
It was moderate Republicans mostly that defected.
It was a moderate. Well, now you can't even make heads or tails. So you got some of the Freedom Caucus folks who don't think it goes far enough. You've got moderate Republicans. You've got some people who just want to bloody up McCarthy. So there's no, you can't figure out who the no votes are. But it went down pretty handily. And so this wouldn't have passed the Senate. So they're not even at a gate point right now. We're passing something that could get to the president's desk. They can't even get their own members in line.
Yeah. So government shutdown coming, but let's talk about something else.
Well, or even, I guess related to this, and so I was born in '88, so not as long of a view of the government. Have shutdowns like this always been a feature of the government like this commonly, or is this just like a new path going forward where we're going to obstruct in every single way possible, and now we're just going to be looking forward to fights on funding the government or raising the debt cap every few years?
So unfortunately, the shutdowns are fairly common. I mean, they've been going on since 70s and 80s, and they're often shut down fights. I mean, that's not uncommon. What's uncommon, though, is the frequency with which they're now happening. And what's uncommon is people threatening the speaker's chair if they don't get exactly what they want. The other thing that's uncommon is usually when someone gives their word, they keep it. And I think McCarthy, candidly, had every intent to keep his word to the president, and then now is having to backtrack because he doesn't have his votes of his own caucus. So that's uncommon.
So there are a bunch of people on the left who watched the speaker fight play out over 4 dramatic days.
Oh, man.
And then they're watching this kind of thing. You know, you've got Matt Gaetz going to the floor, burning the place down. Then he goes on Steve Bannon's podcast, and they trash McCarthy, and everybody calls Congress, and it's this gigantic fight. And there's some on the left who are like, I want some of this fight.
I'm on here. We got to make sure that Destiny and Ryan Grimm have a bigger outreach than Steve Bannon. That's what I'm told.
If we get a bigger one, does that mean we're going to then fuel like this kind of shutdown energy, or like what? Like, why isn't there on the left a kind of Gaetz faction?
Well, I mean, I want you to push back, but I think the left doesn't get enough credit. I mean, there was a progressive faction that got on board with Bernie and Warren at a significant risk. When I decided to co-chair Bernie's campaign, I was the only member of Congress in the entire Congress endorsing him. When AOC endorsed, when others, Pramila endorsed, they took huge risks, and others were with Warren. So that fight got us Biden, who's now on the picket lines at labor, who proposed dental vision and hearing for healthcare, proposed childcare, proposed a $15 wage, got infrastructure, got the IRA, the largest climate bill, and progressives fought there. We shaped the American Rescue Plan. We pushed very hard. We got the child tax credit. Now, did we have failures? Yes, we didn't get enough. I called for the firing of the parliamentarian on the $15 wage. We didn't succeed. We didn't succeed in pushing on voting rights and the end of the filibuster. But I guess the question was, what more did they want us to do? Like, how would a shutdown have achieved those goals?
I feel like Biden's legislative agenda has been more aggressive than I think anybody would have hoped coming into this like historically divided Senate and everything. I think there were a lot of people, even far left, even center left, that didn't really hope for much, that there would be, the American Rescue Plan, we'd have some sort of COVID thing, and then after that it would basically just be nothing. But, as you've said, with the IRA passing and all the other legislation that Biden's worked on, it seems like he's done a really effective job at moving legislation through such a divided Senate, which I think has been really impressive. Just on what you said about the left not getting enough credit for what they have done.
I agree with that. I mean, I think Biden has been far more progressive than people expected. I mean, he's been more progressive than you expected, no?
For sure.
I mean,
now,
if I would have predicted any of this, it'd be crazy.
And I give Biden some, some of that credit of having the sensibility and the values to do that. But I also give the progressives credit. I give the 2018 progressive class credit. I give Bernie credit. I give Warren credit. Now, that's not to say, okay, everything is great. That progressives need to say, look, we haven't made progress on health care and health care being free in this country like it is in so many other places. We haven't made progress on education. People are still burdened with student debt. We haven't made progress on the wages in this country. There's still wages that have stagnated, and ultimately people's take-home pay doesn't feel like enough. And we've got to have a bolder economic populist agenda.
Okay, I want to question. Earlier, we spoke about how from the American public side, you just have people that go to Congress and they vote on legislation, and for a lot of people we think that's kind of all that happens. But the relationships that you guys form in the Senate and in the House are actually really important to how you do day-to-day business. So I'm somebody, and the rest of the country watched eagerly as the Justice Dems came into Congress. It seems like there was kind of this like combative tone. You had the force the vote stuff. There's a lot of that type of discourse going on. And then it seems like people like AOC have kind of settled into a more comfortable rhythm of, right, like, I'm going to push you guys, but I'm also going to work with you guys in a more effective manner than just being very combative, I guess. I'm just kind of curious on like a personal level, how do you navigate your like congressional relationships versus like obligations that you have to your constituents? Like, what does that day-to-day process look like? I'm so curious.
Well, you need 218 votes to get anything done, and you need votes on a committee to get anything done. So my philosophy has been I don't compromise the values of being for Medicare for all, Bernie's bill, or free public college, or wealth tax, or not having PAC money and lobbyist money. But I try to find common ground with colleagues, and I won't go on the floor and, shame colleagues who may have a difference of philosophy. I think some on the progressive side want us to do that. And I understand, they want us to do what Matt Gaetz is doing to McCarthy. But at the end of the day, the Republican philosophy is stop government from funding things. So if things shut down, if things don't work, it's not the end of the world. Our philosophy is we really want funding for free public college and for Medicare for all. How are you going to do that if you're not going to win over people? I guess that's been the dilemma. So I know that there have been critiques of the Justice Democrats, of which I was the first one, and in AOC and the squad, but they haven't moved on many of the issues. They're just trying to navigate to build power while being effective.
Well, you took a big interpersonal risk in 2018 when, during AOC's challenge to Joe Crowley, and people may forget this, Joe Crowley was considered to be the next Speaker of the House.
Mm-hmm.
He might even have challenged Pelosi. Pelosi only won re-election to Speaker because there was nobody to challenge her. Her sort of slogan was, "You can't beat somebody with nobody," and it's because Crowley had been the one that had been positioned for that. He needed some progressive support. He rolled out an endorsement that you had given him earlier.
Yeah, but I endorsed him after he came out for Medicare for all.
And so then he rolled it out right before the election.
Yes.
And then you get hammered on Twitter.
Yeah.
And you're like, you know what? I also endorse AOC.
Yeah.
And Corbin Trent, who was her communications director at the time, said that was so much better for us than if it had been a traditional endorsement.
Yeah, it became a meme almost.
Because
the Khanna dual endorsement.
It brought so much attention to the race.
Yeah.
And then Crowley could not survive attention.
Yeah.
Like he needed that race to be under the
Right.
radar. So how did you decide to kind of pull that trigger, knowing that she's probably going to lose?
Yeah.
And now you've taken a shot at the next Speaker of the House.
Well, she was herself thought she was going to lose. 'Cause
Yeah.
I was on Twitter with her, and I didn't have her at the time her number, but we were DMing each other, and actually, she was fine. A lot of people around her were pushing me to endorse her, and she never pushed that. But once Crowley rolled out that endorsement, I think she DM'd it and saying, "Well, look, I've got the whole world against me, and now the progressives you guys are against me too. Like, fine, I'll just get to do it." Emma was very respectful, and I think that note, her outreach, and then thinking about how it was like when I was a young Indian American running against the establishment, and people would walk in the other direction, and I was like, I just don't want to be part of doing that, so I'll endorse. And when I endorsed her, I said, look, I respect Crowley. I get that he's come for Medicare for all, but we've got to be for new voices, and she's an incredible new leader. I didn't think she'd become an AOC, but that she's going to have a very bright future. And I thought this is someone who's going to be in there for, if not this time, in the future time.
What would Crowley say to you?
Oh, it was heated. In fact, if you look at C-SPAN, there is a clip of him yelling at me on the House floor. Really heated. I mean, we have a cordial relationship, and I don't wish him any negative things, and I know his family is going through a tough time. But at that moment, it was heated. I mean, it was like, what is he doing? I mean, that just wasn't done, and I was getting some criticism from the left. But it was like, why have you not revoked the Crowley endorsement? And actually, AOC, to her credit, I'm sure the tweet still exists, came to my defense and said, look, this guy's already walking the plank. Like, how far do you want him to go? This is good enough. She would have won anyway, given the margins, but this certainly contributed to her momentum because it was the first person from the establishment to say, look, this person is serious and can win. I'm really proud of that.
Yeah, I mean, Ryan and I covered that race. I remember that we were there on that victory night together. That was an incredibly exciting time and such a seismic moment for the insurgent left and the progressive movement and Justice Democrats more broadly. Some of the criticism about Justice Democrats' strategy, in my opinion, is unfounded in the sense that they are trying to make as many gains as possible in really blue districts, and that is where you can get the most bang for your buck. Some people say, well, let's expand and go to purple areas of the country, run some progressive candidates there. Then their batting average is going to be a lot lower, but you're still taking more shots, to mix metaphors there. What's your assessment on how that strategy should be deployed?
Well, there's no doubt to me that we can win in purple districts. I mean, look at Fetterman. He won in a quote-unquote purple state. He ran on Medicare for all. He ran on taxing the ultra-rich. He ran on political reform. And he's one of the most interesting members, in my view, of the entire Congress and having an impact, because he's kind of a straight shooter. And so I do think we can win in these districts. But the challenge is that it's resources. I mean, they are so outmatched. And then when you've got millions of dollars in super PACs coming in against their candidates, I do think the Democratic Party should say no super PACs in Democratic primaries. If you can't unilaterally disarm with the Republican, because it'd be unfair if you just had the Republican using super PACs, and they always use that argument. So say, fine, in a general election, we're not going to unilaterally disarm, but we should not be using super PACs in a Democratic primary for the House, Senate, or presidency. And any super PAC, whether it's a labor super PAC, whether it's a corporate super PAC, because you can't distinguish. Then they'll get into, well, why can there be some super PAC or not at the other? And that, to me, that's why the Justice Democrats are resource strapped, because they've had to defend in these districts against an onslaught of resources. So they're looking and saying, okay, let's do a few races and win instead of spreading ourselves out thin and get zero wins. But in concept, I agree with you. We should be fielding people everywhere.
No, I mean, I actually think the bluer districts is a better strategy, but sorry, go on, Ryan.
No, I was just going to say I've got to run because I got to go tape something else. So it's always great to have you on here, and I'm glad you're so open. I wish more of your colleagues would do this. Do you ever hear from them when they see you out there and say, like yesterday we did a Twitter Spaces with Unusual Whales. Like, you're one of the few that does those types of.
I think what happens is people are afraid of getting asked tough questions. I was telling earlier with Emma. I mean, she asked me about Mulvey, and she asked me about my vote on socialism, and she asked me about a fundraiser at David Sachs. Right? Well, I go on MSNBC or CNN. I know those questions aren't going to come up. I know exactly what the questions are, and I know that if I say these things, it'll be fine. Or the stock conversation we had, people said, okay, you're for banning stocks, but your wife is wealthy and she has a trust. And explain that, right? Yeah. My philosophy has been that you go in, you answer the best you can, you be transparent, and overall, people will build more trust for that than if you avoid the questions. A lot of other members and others think that it's bad. Like, why go, and what if you make an error, and what if you say something that is dumb? What if someone on this panel makes a comment that is outrageous and you don't respond in time to condemn it? Then you're in trouble. So they just think that the risk of it is very high. And I think we live in a different time. I have had people excoriate me. I've gone on Breaking Points or Brianna Joy or your program, or sometimes the Majority Report, and all the comments are negative. It's like kind of
watch out, Ryan.
And then I'll run into the person at the airport, and they'll say, "We just love that you go on. We're for it earns a grudging respect." And so I'm a big proponent on more of our folks doing it. On the right, they do it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
They run to Steve Bannon.
They do. All right, well, thank you guys. Thanks for having me on here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ryan.
See you guys again soon.
Good seeing you.
I guess maybe I can ask you a question. I don't think I've heard you speak about this, but I feel like you'll bring a really unique perspective, which is, I don't know what you think about this. I feel like there's a lot of young men that feel super disillusioned and are getting really caught up by these Tates and anti-establishment people, and just people who really kind of seem to rail against maybe even the entire democratic process. What do you think Democrats can do to kind of reach out to these young men and make these men feel like Democrats care about their interests and needs?
I haven't been asked that. It's a very thoughtful question. I've read Richard Reeves' book on the disillusionment of boys and men. I would say a couple things. One, people have to see the economic prospects ahead of them, right? It used to be that if you worked hard, you'd have a shot at getting a house, you'd have a shot at being able to support your family, you'd be able to build wealth. And a lot of folks are just disillusioned. They don't think they can ever buy a house. Yeah. They can't afford rent. They don't have a clear pathway to building economic wealth. So I think we have to talk about, in real ways, the economic challenges that folks face. I think we have to talk about why certain values of respect and respect for women, respect for our family matter in a society, and that it can't just be a free-for-all conversation, that there's a reason that society evolved to have certain standards, and throwing things out, throwing the rule book out without reflecting on why those norms or rules exist is not being macho or brave. It's actually just being dumb at times, and having those honest conversations.
Yeah, I mean, I think that just to add to your point, so much of the conversation surrounding young male alienation ends up falling back on, it's like, well, it's the feminists, right? I mean, they're the ones creating these new rules and no one knows what it means. But I think so much of it really is general societal alienation, right? When you don't know if you miss a paycheck, if you're going to get evicted from your apartment, when you don't have health care that you can rely on, it creates a general level of societal anxiety that is really acute. And it's not just men that feel anxious or alienated. It's women, it's everybody in this country. So, I mean, generally, what's your sense on the mental health crisis being addressed from an economic perspective in Congress, and what can be done to alleviate it?
We're not doing nearly enough to address the anxiety that the American dream is slipping away for people. I mean, what we need to be doing is providing free health care through Medicare for all, free education or career training, making sure that the corporate Wall Street isn't buying up all the housing, and having some plan for people to be able to buy a house, some sense that they can stand on their 2 feet and have an economic future where they can support a family. But if you have men, young men or women, but who don't think that they can support a family, who don't think that they can get a house, who don't think that they have any economic dignity, that I think is alienating. And it's alienating for young people across the board, but it has a gender component. Now, what has come is people are blaming some of the feminism and empowerment of women and empowerment of minorities. So first, to them who have a problem with that, I'd say tough. Get over yourself.
Right.
That's, you're not, if you're going to rely on being unequal and being domineering and having unequal advantage to have a status, then you're just wrong, and you're on the wrong side of history. And I think we have to be that direct with folks who have that sentiment. But if your alienation stems because you don't see how you can be productive and have the American dream, then let's talk and let's have a conversation. But also, I think that we have to be direct in the defense of feminism. Right? We've got one side that's blaming feminism, and we don't have anyone out there being like, well, here's why we have feminism, because we want talented people to have their God-given potential manifest, and we've had hundreds of years of that not happening. And if you got a problem with that, let me tell you, you're on the wrong side.
Yeah.
I think it feels like the scary issue that's come up is, for a long time there's been a big societal push to kind of help women achieve at minimum equality, and now surpassing men when it comes to different areas of life, whether it be workplace opportunities or college education. Those are the two big ones. I think a lot of the fear for younger men that exists in society today is it felt like there were people willing to set up a big societal infrastructure to kind of bolster women, which I think we've done exceptionally well. But now as men have continued to fall behind, especially over COVID, I think the dropout rates in colleges for men far exceeded women. Now you're in an area where I don't know if they feel like Democrats or progressive people on the left are going to come out with we need to help the men now catch up in college. I think they're worried that that voice doesn't exist in the same way that it did for women, and then because that voice doesn't exist on the left, people look to the Jordan Petersons, the Andrew Tates, the all of the people on the right that are willing to capture the ear of those people, the Dennis Pragers and everything. I think that's kind of the fear. It feels like on the left they're scared to talk to majority class sometimes, whether it's white, whether it's men, and then they end up looking elsewhere to the right, unfortunately.
That's a fair point, and here's what I'd say. The first thing we did in Congress was not pass child care, which would have disproportionately helped the 2 million women who were out of work get back into work. We passed infrastructure, and infrastructure actually helped. The jobs were 70% men. So this idea that the Democratic Party isn't doing things that also help men factually isn't the case. Now, maybe our communication is a problem, But if you asked me what the highest priority in COVID was, I wouldn't have told you go past infrastructure. I would have said go past childcare. That was what was hurting the economy. 85% of women say that lack of childcare, is why they leave a job. Now, what do I think we should be doing with men in communities that have also felt alienation? I've gone to Johnstown, Pennsylvania. I've gone to Warren, Ohio. I've gone downriver, Michigan, where you had large amounts of men lose their jobs, lose factories, lose industry. Why did we just watch while that happened? Why can't we have a massive reindustrialization plan? Bring the new steel plants back that also have a low carbon footprint. Talk about bringing new jobs and economic opportunity. That's going to help men and women. It's going to help black and white folks, but it's certainly going to help the people you're talking about. It's going to help the white working class as well, and address the issues of debts of despair, and invest in healthcare there, invest in mental health counseling there. So I think that there is an importance of showing up in communities, and we've posted videos where there are a lot of white men who are being helped. We posted videos where a lot of African American black men and women were being helped. So I think you can't exclude communities, and you have to understand that there are definitely communities that are hurting, and men who are also hurting, as long as you never compromise on the principles of feminism. Don't blame equality for your problems. Don't blame equality opportunity for your problems. Blame society hollowing out the working and middle class.
Yeah, just a comment, I really agree that the issue, it feels sometimes is more a perception one than the reality of what's happening.
That's
right,
and just bringing up the child care, I'm curious. I know the Republicans obviously have a slim majority in the House, but the child tax credit during COVID reduced child poverty by 40%. Is it a priority for you when hopefully the Democrats take back the House in 2024 to re-up the expanded child tax credit and make that more permanent policy? Because I think we've tried it and it's worked. Joe Manchin and the Republicans killed it, but I would love to see that be more permanent.
Absolutely. I mean, we know now that poverty is a policy choice in this country. We had the child tax credit, which was basically $300 for each child for working and middle class families. So you made $50,000. You have a kid, you'd get $300. You had 2 kids, you get $600 a month. People were using it, we know statistically, to buy school supplies, to buy clothes for their kids, buy nutrition, food for their kids. And then and poverty dropped 40%. Then we couldn't extend it, and poverty has gone up 40%. And the Republicans blamed Joe Biden, who actually brought it down. What we should be doing is extending it. But beyond that, why can't we have child care at $10 a day in this country? People say, oh, that's so cheap. How are you going to do that? Child care is broken. It costs $10,000 for an average family, and the child care workers are broke. I mean, how do you have the system not working either way? If you did $10 a day, that's still $3,600 a year. That's still a lot of money. We should be funding child care in this country the way we fund public education. They're doing it in Canada. They do it in every other industrialized country. You say, how do you pay for this stuff? Pay for it by taxing people in my district. This is one thing I've not understood for the life of me. The guy who represents all the millionaires and billionaires is telling you raise their taxes. I represent a district that has 1/3 of the S&P 500. It's $10 trillion. How is this a hard vote for anyone else in the country? Like, all the billionaires and millionaires, most of them are in my district or in New York. If I can be for this, how can other people not be for taxing the ultra wealthy?
And not to mention all the productivity gains from the people that then can work too, because they've got childcare for their children. They don't have to drop out of the economy completely to do childcare. Yeah.
Exactly. $12 billion of gains is what is estimated in a yearly basis just by having people be able to live up to their talent.
One thing that you mentioned that I think it had me thinking, which is essentially this perception issue, right? I think a lot of people get very kind of unsophisticated in what they blame. And you've brought up the economy a lot. But one of the biggest issues I feel like I see in online politics is getting people interested in the economy in the way that the economy actually works, right? Versus like this nebulous idea of economy. How do you get average citizens to kind of buy into this idea that the economy matters, that these things need to be talked about, and to get sophisticated enough to understand like different ways that bills and policies can actually improve economic standings for average Americans?
Yeah. Well, we can't just lecture them about how they should feel about the economy. They say, a politician, we've created 13 million jobs. Unemployment is at record lows. And they just kind of tune out. They're like, well, come on. my salary hasn't gone up.
Yeah.
It costs me too much to rent. I go to the grocery store and it's costing me more. I am filling up my tank, it's costing more. We got to be real with folks and be honest that the working and middle class has gotten shafted for the past 40 years. Then we could say, look, President Biden is trying to fix this. He's not going to fix it overnight. Here's what he wants to do. Here's what he has done. He's providing funding to bring manufacturing back, infrastructure back. We have put money in people's pockets with stimulus checks and a child tax credit. Here's what the other side wants to do. We're not going to, they want tax cuts for the wealthy, they want deregulation. We're not going to pretend that your life is magically great. We're not going to try to sell you on something you don't feel. But we are going to try to say that the policies we're building, done even more, is what's actually going to help improve your life and get you what you want. Most people don't want to be millionaires and billionaires. Some do, more power to them. But most people just want a house, economic security, being able to live after their family, and they feel like they can't do that now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, actually. It seems like authenticity is a really big thing for you specifically. You want to have the conversations that people are sometimes hesitant, which is why I think you're reaching out to the streamer world, which is really cool. As you said, I think you talked about if you go on CNN, you know the questions they're going to ask you. Do you know if, like, what the reticence is beyond just like we don't know what questions will be asked of like getting into places like TikTok? Because it seems like when politicians do that, it's really successful a lot of time. People love kind of that organic interaction with people that are actually making decisions that change their life.
Yeah, well, I was amused by Vivek Ramaswamy, and I don't want to take an attack at him. I just, on the one hand, he's got this platform like that people under 25 shouldn't vote, and then at the debate last night, he said, "Well, why are you on TikTok? We got to win the young vote." I said, "You got to pick one side, buddy. Which one are you on?"
I think it's okay if you want to attack Vivek Ramaswamy.
No,
I mean, he's a bit of a
You're
clown.
not going to find much fighting here.
My words, not yours.
Well, it's just I don't want to give the guy more oxygen on something that's not going far. But you know, I don't understand why we're not on. We're on TikTok. You know, I'm on these conversations. I'm on the China Select Committee. Do I have concerns on who manages TikTok? Sure, but that has nothing to do with the millions of people who are on TikTok. I mean, they're on there. If you want an American company to buy it, fine, do that. But don't. Why are you boycotting communicating with Americans? You want just China to communicate with them? I mean, so I think we have to be on these platforms. I think you have to be real in terms of answering questions. The only thing Donald Trump was able to capture, because he's got absolutely no solutions, is he was able to say, your lives are terrible because of what this country did in offshoring and other things. And he channels grievance. And that is the first people have to say someone gets it, and then they have to say, okay, here's what you're going to do about it. Our party has got to be more also about we get it. Like, we understand what life is like for most people today. Yeah. And the reality is there's anxiety, right? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but most people are anxious. This is not the America. My father, when he came in the 1960s, this was the place to be. We were sending a person to the moon. We were building things. You came to America, you were going to be part of the middle class, working class. Now, we had deep issues of race. My parents probably couldn't have gotten a meeting with a member of Congress, a staffer. We had issues, of course, in the black community that are incomparable, and segregation. And we've made progress there. But on the economy, we've hollowed out this idea of the American dream. And until we get to acknowledge that and focus on that, I feel like we're going to have people alienated.
What do you do if you're a viewer at home and you watch stuff like this and you want to see like people from Congress making more regular appearances on my stream or the Majority Report? If you're like somebody at home, what's the best way to like support that? Would it be like writing letters to your congressman?
No one
or
reads
like,
those letters.
No one reads them?
Oh,
geez, okay.
I'm just being blunt.
Oh, my goodness. Okay.
Say,
is it phone calls then? Is it picking?
The letters happen, and occasionally I read a random thing, but what they do is they summarize them. I mean, they summarize, okay, this is pro-Ukraine, anti-Ukraine, etc., and you get a report. So if there's very big public sentiment on something, fine, do it. I'm not saying don't write to your member of Congress, but actually if you tweet at them, because a lot of members are on Twitter. I mean, I know the stream, but if you're on social media and you catch their attention, you can say, look, I heard Khanna go on with Destiny, go on a Majority Report, go on these things. I mean, get their attention on social media. Members are often there. Show up to their town halls. Show up in person. members of Congress showing up to them in person really makes a difference. Try to get the attention of their staff and show up and meet their members of staff. Coming to Capitol Hill on Capitol Hill Day, that gets people's attention. But you have a lot of power. The people out there, the millennials and Gen Z are going to be a huge voting bloc, and I feel people are getting how to communicate with them. Right? They're not watching MSNBC like my parents do. They're not watching CNN. So tell people how that this is what you want them to do to get your information. This is how you're going to make your decisions.
Bit of a hard pivot here, but I'm noticing that younger people are increasingly becoming more disillusioned with United States foreign aid to Israel, right? And the fact that we are still supporting a regime that is engaging in apartheid. And I am discouraged as somebody that wants to see Palestinian humanity respected, because it feels like no matter how far right Netanyahu and the Israeli government pivot, it just nothing seems to change in terms of our relationship with providing them with money. What is your sense of how things are shifting, if at all, in Congress about our relationship with Israel, given how things have escalated and essentially Netanyahu being quite clear that continued settlements and occupation is the goal?
So I'm center left on the issue. I'm not where you are, but I am also more progressive than many. I'll answer your question in detail, but let me just say on the vote we had last night, because it's fresh on my mind. We had a vote about will you permanently prohibit any U.S. money being used to move the embassy from Jerusalem back to Tel Aviv. And only 60-some of us in Congress voted no on that. I mean, our embassy never was in Jerusalem. That is, we weren't supposed to put it there because that's contested still for the final peace talks. And you don't even have a majority of Democrats willing to go back to the policy of not having a potential conversation about moving where our embassy is. So what am I for? I'm for no new settlements. I'm for our aid not being used in any way that violates human rights, and the upholding of the Leahy law that is supposed to do that, and tracking of that at the State Department. I'm for the smart lifting of the blockade in Gaza, which has led to 42% unemployment there. I'm for making sure that that you don't have settler violence against Palestinians or the demolition of homes, and have been on a number of letters regarding that. I am for and supported Jan Schakowsky's resolution on making sure that America affirms democracy and the court in Israel. All of this puts me in the minority. But I've supported aid to Israel. I've supported the funding to Israel. I've said Israel is an ally, which I believe. If this is not where you are, I mean, I know
Sure.
you're more critical, and I just don't want to mislead people listening.
I appreciate the candor.
But I think that even getting to my position is an uphill battle.
Well, especially in Congress.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the frustration, at least for me. I mean, what is Israel's incentive to stop settlements if we do not condition our aid?
Well, the incentive would be if the United States American president said no new settlements, that would be a pretty big incentive.
I would love that, yeah.
And I believe that's what the American president should say, and should be very candid. No new settlements, and that this is what America expects. And making sure that the funding, which it isn't, I don't think, none of the funding is used to assist with the new settlements. I mean, that is making sure the use of the aid is not for things that violate human rights. And that is a position that Elizabeth Warren tried to articulate in her campaign, which many progressives believe in, and that you can still affirm, as I do, the U.S.-Israel relationship, the partnership, the cultural and strategic value and moral value of the relationship, while pushing for it in a more democratic, pluralistic direction with ultimately two states. I think, though, the progressive movement has a lot of work to do still to get members to a place where I am. I mean, my position is a position that is still a minority position in the Congress.
Certainly, and then I think I'm sorry to
No.
dominate, but I I think part of that too is that when, for example, a member like Summer Lee is a bit more on probably
she's more progressive on, or more
where
whatever
I am,
left.
right?
Yeah.
AIPAC spends millions and millions of dollars to defeat her, both in her primary and then in the general election. It didn't work. But those are the kinds of things that I think progressives are up against, and you talk about money and interest all the time, that I don't necessarily know if the general public understands why that chills the debate on that front.
Well, absolutely. And this is why I was for a general ban on super PAC money in primaries. Because you can't say, in my view, you can't say, okay, if you're a pro-Israel advocacy group, you can't spend super PAC money, but if you're a pharmacy group, you can spend it, or if you're a group wants to promote U.S.-India relationships, you can spend it, or if you're a left labor group and you care, you can spend it. Just ban it. Ban super PAC money. This way it's facially neutral, no one can complain, and ban it in primaries. And the reality is progressives often don't have the resources. Other corporate interests do, like the health insurance, pharma. I saw it in Bernie's campaign. It was a big problem. All the health insurance were doing super PAC funding against him in the early states. Ban that in the primaries. You'd get a much cleaner election.
I guess looking at foreign policy stuff then, obviously our track record over the past 25 years with foreign intervention is not the greatest, given Iraq, Afghanistan, among other things. What do you think when you look at the U.S. support for Ukraine? What do you think our moral obligation is there ultimately in terms of how much funding, for how long, for what kind of operations? What are our red lines for how Ukraine is allowed to act? How conditional is our support for them? What do you think the moral obligation for the United States is there?
Well, we just had a vote on this as well, and I voted for continuing the funding for Ukraine. I mean, Putin was absolutely in the wrong to go in to invade a sovereign country. You start with that principle. I mean, we can't just go into Mexico. We can't just go into Canada.
Or into Iraq.
Or,
well, I mean...
Well, I was opposed to the Iraq War.
No, that's what I mean, though.
I mean, I was
we
opposed,
have done those things.
I was opposed to the Iraq War. I was my first campaign. I got crushed running in a primary against someone who had voted for the Iraq War, and I ran a primary campaign against him. It's still one of the things I'm proudest of doing. Mm-hmm. So it was morally right, in my view, to come to Ukraine's defense. If we stopped the aid tomorrow, you would have Putin march into Kiev. The mission has largely been successful. They haven't been able to make penetration into the Donbass because of the landmines, but people thought Putin would be in Kiev 2-3 weeks after. It's only because of the United States aid and NATO that we've prevented that. And I agree that there's got to be some just peace. I was on a Progressive Caucus letter calling for dialogue, and I got hammered for that, even while I voted for every aid package. I said, you got to have communications with Russia, with Ukraine, with other allies to help bring a just peace. And I'm all for doing that. But what I'm not for doing is, until we can get to that, withdrawing our aid, because that's going to mean that all of the sacrifice was in vain. I mean, Putin would just march into Kiev the minute we left. And that's so what I've said is I'm going to continue to support it, but I'm also one of the voices saying, let's at the same time have de-escalation and look at how we have a just peace agreement.
Do you have in your mind, when you say de-escalation in Ukraine and Russia, I'm not asking you to create policy right now, but do you have an idea of what that could possibly look like?
The off-ramps, yeah.
I think it could be deconflicting areas, temporary ceasefires in areas, places where we're saying that the conflict is not expanding. I mean, this is a conflict that was really going on since 2014, right? And then Putin marched in and made it much worse, but it wasn't like there was peace in the area. So I think deconflicting, seeing if there are regions where you can have temporary ceasefires or not have expansion, all of that should be part of a conversation. Mm-hmm. I mean, ultimately, Ukrainian sovereignty needs to be restored, or we need to listen to what the Ukrainian people want in terms of a just peace. But we should be facilitating that while we're providing the aid.
How do you feel about U.S. or China navigating some of those peace conversations? Do you have a preference of who that falls to, or what do you think America's role should be within that?
I believe that America obviously needs to continue leading the NATO world in supporting Ukraine, but if there are other countries that can be brokers in trying to get us to a just peace, whether that is India, Israel, which both have relationships, by the way, both with Ukraine or Russia, if China can be constructive, I mean, I welcome anyone. That was the idea of multilateralism and United Nations. I mean, that doesn't say America shouldn't be a leader and in NATO and leading the world. It's to say that leading the world requires pragmatism of understanding which people who can help facilitate this.
Much of Joe Biden's foreign policy has been, I've agreed with a lot, but one thing I'm a little troubled by is this orientation towards a rivalry with China, which seems to be, look, it's inevitable in terms of the economic rivalry, but Biden seems to think that this is fairly existential, and a lot of his burgeoning relationship with Modi to create a rivalry or to get India more on our side in that rivalry is a part of that, as well as the I think 4 military bases, I believe, in the Philippines that he reopened. What's your position there? Because I don't want to get into another Cold War situation. I'm understanding about the rivalry and those economic factors there, but it's a bit of a tough line to walk.
I'm not for a Cold War. I'm on the China Select Committee, and I've said that. I have a bipartisan trip that I'm trying to lead to China. I can't get the Republicans to approve it. Yeah. We haven't been able to go to China since pre-COVID. I said, even during the Soviet Union, we talked to each other. We've got to talk to each other. But we do have to be clear-eyed about 2 aspects of the U.S.-China relationship. The trade deficit was a total mistake. I mean, China has a trade deficit with India, Japan, South Korea, and the United States. We hollowed out our working and middle class. We never said, let's have all of Wall Street go to London. We never said, let's have all of Hollywood go to Bollywood. We never did this to any of our coastal elite jobs. And we never said, let's have all of tech go to Estonia or Ukraine. But with manufacturing, we said, let it all go to China. That was a big blunder. So at the top of the U.S.-China relationship needs to be the rebalancing and lowering the trade deficit, which, by the way, is good for them because they have an export production economy at the expense of their own consumer welfare. That's why they have so much economic disparity in China. It's not working for China. So I would lead with that, and I would make it very clear that we have to deter any invasion of Taiwan, that we affirm the one China policy, that this is about a conversation between China and Taiwan, but you can have no coercion and no military invasion of the island of Taiwan. I mean, that would be like Putin invading Ukraine. If you had those 2 frameworks, I think you could be clear-eyed about the threats and challenges China faces while trying to avoid a Cold War. And that's the art of diplomacy and statesmanship.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And based on the jobs that you described, that's also a reorientation of our trade policies as well, which is key. I know we're bumping up against it here. I believe it is 3 o'clock, so we should wrap. Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Congressman Khanna. Really appreciate your extended time today.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes.
Appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, welcome to the Young Turks coverage here of Representative Ro Khanna is with us here in D.C. Representative Khanna, how you doing, brother?
Good to see you.
Okay, good to see you. So we're going to do a couple of things here.
Yeah.
At TYT, we're going to launch something called Operation Hope, and that's just getting the community together.
Love it.
And we're going to basically get caught trying. Okay.
Yeah.
We're going to try to do all sorts of different things, including passing legislation from the outside, which seems near impossible. It seems near impossible from the inside, right? But one of the things we'd love to talk to you about is outside of the context of the normal news. You normally come on the show, talk about a bill or something else that's happening, is how do things work?
Yeah.
Because I think that a lot of people have no idea how Congress works and what's possible and not possible and how to get it done. So let's start with the beginning, okay? When the Democrats are out of power in the House, is there anything you can do in the House to push legislation forward?
Well, there are 2 avenues. One is to look for narrow wins on bipartisan issues. Those are things like effective use of government agencies to have better services, right? Or figuring out how do we bring certain types of manufacturing back that are critical to the United States. But in terms of the big stuff, the only way we can do it is if the McCarthy makes a concession to Democrats. So that requires him having Democratic votes. So far, they haven't needed them for anything they've done. They've been able to pass things on partisan Republican votes, but we're in a unique situation. So if they come to Democratic votes, then we can have some leverage on saying, here's what we need.
So, Ro, I'm not sure that the American people even understand that if the Republicans control the House or the Senate, they have complete power over what is introduced as
complete power in the House, not in the Senate, but in the House they do.
Yeah.
So McCarthy gets to decide what vote he can bring to the floor. So let's say, we discussed paid family leave. So the most simple idea, I work 80-hour weeks, but if I need to be there for my family or kids, I can, right, as a member of Congress. I may work 100-hour weeks, but I have total control. If tomorrow, right now, I want to say, Cenk, we're done, I got to go be with my kids, I'm going to go do that. Most Americans don't have that. And so we're saying, no, they need to have paid family leave. That's 80% or so approval. If you put it on a floor vote, it would probably pass. The problem is you can't put it on a floor vote because McCarthy gets to decide what goes on the floor.
So in the Senate, is it different?
Senate is different. Senate, senators have more power to be able to bring things for a vote. Schumer has a lot of say. But the Senate, there's the filibuster. So you bring something and you got to get a 60 votes. And it's mind-boggling you haven't been able to get 60 votes in the Senate for paid family leave.
Yeah, I mean, we start with paid family leave because it's at 84%, to your point about being above 80, and 74% of Republicans want it. And so, Ro, I know that you know this, but do the people in Congress understand, generally speaking, that when something that has 84% popularity is near impossible to pass, that the country gets enormously frustrated and feels like the government is completely broken?
I think people don't understand the anger at Congress. They don't understand the anger because we're not doing enough on guns, because we've lost reproductive rights in this country. If the Supreme Court haven't been able to codify Roe, which has a vast majority opinion, that we haven't gotten paid family leave, we haven't gotten dental, vision, and hearing and Medicare, which is overwhelmingly popular. We haven't gotten a minimum wage increase. And people look at this, these are 60, 70% approval issues. These are not issues that are polarizing. And you guys haven't been able to act. And then they see, well, they get all this PAC money, they get all this lobbyist money, they're trading stocks, they're going and becoming lobbyists after they do their time. And people are just like, the system isn't working. Now, I was asking someone, I said, how does this relate to other times of history and corruption? Because there are other times where we've had a lot of corruption and then not so much. My sense is that the post-Watergate era, there wasn't as much, but then we had kind of this wealth inequality that just was exacerbated. And now you're living in a time of a lot of corruption in the system.
So you're getting into my wheelhouse, but I do want to go back to process because I think despite all of that negativity, we're trying to be positive and we're trying to do something positive in the world today, let alone later. But I wanted to ask you about that block in the House because, again, I think, I'm not sure the Democrats communicated to the country well enough. If the Republicans hold the House, there will literally never be anything done for the American people as long as that's the case.
Nothing of bold significance on things we care about, which is how do you have a house, how do you pay rent, how do you get more wages, how do you get health care, how do you get your college costs met? You can't do any of that.
Yeah, the Republicans would never, ever help with that.
Never, because they want to cut spending, and they want less regulation, they want rest. They don't want paid family leave. They'll channel people's grievance. This is the Trump playbook. Your jobs are offshored, you're not making out, some people have control of the wealth, but they won't actually pass the policies to help. They'll get in and they'll do tax cuts. Their agenda is simple. It's been that for the last 40, 50 years. Tax cuts for the rich, tax cuts for businesses, deregulation.
Yeah, so let's go back to the process for paid family leave. So at least we hold the Senate, the Democrats do. So any senator can introduce it.
Yes.
And then the second step is that Senator Schumer would have to put it up for a vote as the majority leader.
Yes.
So, okay, so if the audience or anyone wanted to help to do that, first they would ask a senator to introduce it in the Senate.
Right.
Then they would ask Senator Schumer to put it up for a vote.
Yes.
Okay, and now 60 votes is not going to happen because the Republicans will block it. So the only way in the world that they could get it past the Senate is to, if it's not to get rid of the filibuster, is to make an exception for the filibuster.
Or maybe there would be 60 votes in the Senate. I don't know if they're moderate Republican senators who would pass paid family leave. I just don't know the vote count on that. And I'm not sure if Schumer's ever brought it for a up or down vote, but that's a vote that he should have.
Yeah, and And there has been an exception to the filibuster before. It was to raise the debt ceiling in the first 2 years of Biden's term. So it's not like it's not possible. It's definitely possible.
Right.
They're just choosing not to do it.
Yeah, I mean, there are exceptions on reconciliation. I mean, on anything financial, they've had an exception to the filibuster. They can expand that.
Yes.
Supreme Court justices, to confirm them, they don't use the filibuster.
Okay, so there are a lot of exceptions to the
There are.
filibuster. So, okay, that's a giant opening because that means it really is the choice of Chuck Schumer as to whether you use the filibuster or you just call. Is it Schumer? Would he be the sole person responsible for saying we're doing an exception?
Well, no, you'd have to get the Senate parliamentarian to agree with him. Now, you can fire the parliamentarian and find a sympathetic parliamentarian, but eventually it would require a vote of the caucus, a majority vote, to say we affirm the decision of the parliamentarian.
Right. So
you need 50 senators basically to agree to expanding exceptions to the filibuster or getting rid of the filibuster.
Right. Unless you fire the parliamentarian and the parliamentarian says you can do it.
Yeah, and then I don't know the procedures of whether you can overturn the parliamentarian and what votes that takes. I mean,
yeah. Okay, so you're going to get to some degree of procedure, but at the bottom line is there's more than 50 Democratic senators, so you would have to lose Manchin or some of the so-called independents like Sinema, and they would have to raise their hand and say, I do not want moms to get 12 weeks off once they have a baby.
Right, but they won't say that. They'll say, I like this legislation, but I'm opposed to getting rid of the filibuster because then the other side may do it and they'll do something worse. I mean, it's not a compelling argument because we'd pass popular legislation. I don't think the other side will be able to repeal it, even with a 51 vote majority. But that's what they'll say.
Yes. So now let's go over to the House side. So first block is Kevin McCarthy. So somehow magically Kevin McCarthy has to allow it for a vote.
Yes.
And at that point, who's introducing it? Like once we know that he will allow it.
Usually it should be a Republican, and you could find Republicans who are for it. Mm-hmm. It's easier if it's a majority.
Okay. But could a Democrat do it?
Yeah, but then it would have to be that McCarthy would not only allow a vote on it, he'd allow a Democratic bill, and that'd be harder.
I see. Okay, so you need a Republican.
Or at least a partner with a Republican.
Okay. And do you have a sense of how many Republicans in the House would be ballpark moderate enough to consider something that 74% of their own voters want?
You know, at least 20 to 30 members.
20 to 30, that's not bad.
Yeah.
We can work on that.
20 to 30 would. I do believe it would pass in some form. But the obstacle is that they're not going to get, the Matt Gaetz and all will tell McCarthy, if you put this up, we're going to motion to vacate. Well, you'll lose your seat. You'll lose your speakership. We don't want more spending.
Uh-huh. And could he put it up for a vote and have enough Democrats support him as a speaker to get past the Matt Gaetz problem?
Yeah, but then he'd lose the speakership next term or lose leadership, so he'd be then a lame duck.
Why would he lose it if he could get enough Democrats to vote with him?
Because let's say he gets the votes this term. Next term, he's going to need 218 to become speaker if they were still in the majority. Mm-hmm. And no Democrat's going to say, next term, I'm going to vote for McCarthy. This time he got Gaetz and all. They wouldn't do it the next time.
Right. That seems like an issue for another day for McCarthy to worry about rather than today.
Yeah.
And a lot of things are going to happen between now and the next term. So would a bill have to be introduced before McCarthy made that concession, or could it be introduced immediately thereafter? Like, is paid family leave basically ready to go?
It's ready to go. The bill is there. There are a lot of bills there.
Yeah.
It's really convincing McCarthy to bring it up for a vote.
So I don't expect you to remember this. I don't remember it. But do you remember if any Republicans voted for it last summer? Probably not, because it was inside Build Back Better.
Probably inside Build Back Better, and they voted. I don't think we had a clean up or down vote on it, which is something some of us called for. Like, let's take these very popular policies and just have an up or down vote on them in addition to the big bill.
So is it possible for you to find a Republican partner to introduce it as a clean bill? At least and that's another process question. When I say introduce it, what happens if, let's say, you and Jim Jordan, just to make it a hilarious one, right, decided that you guys were going to do paid family leave together? I mean, he's a diehard Republican, so he would never want to help moms.
Right.
But but if he did want to help a single average American,
we do a press release. We'd come maybe on your show, it'd get introduced, and then it'd just sit there in committee.
It'd sit there in committee.
And the committee wouldn't move it.
Okay, so the minute that we have a resolution or a bill, then we goes to committee, then it goes to McCarthy,
yes.
right? So if McCarthy says yes in a deal, would the committee by definition say yes, or would you still have a problem getting past the committee?
You'd most likely have the committee say yes. Sometimes the speaker can also bypass the committees if he really wants to.
Okay, so I want the audience to understand how near impossible it is if the Democrats don't hold the House.
Yes.
So I don't know that the Democrats ever made that clear to people. It makes it seem like, oh, well, it'll be hard, but,
right.
you know, and I think the press makes us feel like, well, in the 1990s we used to pass bills.
Yeah, terrible ones, right. Like cutting welfare and cutting essential spending. I mean, those weren't great. NAFTA, which hollowed out the working and middle class. If you want to pass bills, bipartisan bills that aren't going to help the working and middle class, you can do that all day on a bipartisan basis.
Yeah.
You know, if I had proposed a tax cut for corporations, I'm sure the Republicans would pass that. Or if I proposed, as happened in the 1990s, the deregulation of Glass-Steagall so that Wall Street can make more investment banking, of course Republicans will pass that. So, yeah, it's possible to get bipartisan legislation. What's not possible right now is to get bipartisan legislation that helps working class people.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, Glass-Steagall was repealed in a bipartisan way with Bill Clinton and Phil Gramm.
Right.
Phil Gramm, who's deep right-wing Republican, and
right.
Bill Clinton, who's a deep right-wing Democrat. That's my opinion. Okay, so you know what? Then let me just start Operation Hope. I mean, what we're gonna do is we're gonna have it up on our website, and it's just as simple as us collaborating with the community and asking them, how do you think we could do this? How do you think we could put pressure on folks, etc. How can we get it done? Do we go to the media? Do we go to politicians? Do we go to the right wing? Do we go to the left wing?
Yeah.
Right? How do we do it together? Right? So can I ask then, as a first step, can you begin to see if you can find a Republican to introduce it,
Sure.
just so that it's in a committee,
Sure.
so that if anything goes right, we can go in that direction?
I'd love to. We've worked on things before, amendments on $15 wage, on I'm on, Nancy Mason and I are on the Child Care Caucus. We could work probably together. I'd be happy to do that.
Okay, that's excellent. That's already we're on the board. Okay, we're on the board for effort.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and remember the slogan is
trying.
Get caught trying. Okay, so, all right, now back to McCarthy, because anybody sitting out there is going to think, nah, it's not. Kevin McCarthy's not going to let you vote on paid family leave, just like we talked about. That helps the average American. It's overwhelmingly
Right.
popular, helps moms. Republicans have no interest.
Right.
Unless a mom is like Mom Incorporated.
Right.
And then, you framed it as a 12-week tax cut. And you're like, wait a minute. But okay, but it's not impossible, right? Because right now, they're shutting the government down. It looks like Republicans
just came back from votes on that, and no progress.
No progress, so it's going to get shut down almost for sure.
Yeah.
And the Freedom Caucus guys, Matt Gaetz, et cetera, don't look like they're ever going to move, because they're.
Yeah, they want McCarthy's scalp. I mean, they've said that. So they want, when you have no ideology on this fight and just want him to come down. I mean, it's hard to imagine. Maybe they compromise after a few weeks, but right now there's no progress.
So that's good news. The reason it's good news, it's not good news to have the government shut down.
Right.
It's terrible news,
Yeah,
right?
Terrible for troops, for
Right.
federal workers. I mean, no one should wish for that.
No, of course not. Now, having said that, though, the silver lining in that is that the good news is that there's some percentage chance, and I happen to think it's a high one, I don't know what you think of it, that McCarthy's going to need Democratic votes.
If we can make the case that he's really responsible for the shutdown, because right now they blame Biden as much. I mean, it's shocking.
It's
so we've got to
ridiculous.
communicate better that this is a McCarthy-led shutdown, that Biden made a deal. McCarthy is reneging on the deal. Because if they don't have that, if people just think all of Washington's to blame and the president's to blame, then they have no incentive, right? Biden's numbers are down, and they just ride this out and allow the Biden's numbers to keep low.
So there's potentially a couple of different ways that a government shutdown ends. So you're right, they'll blame Biden, and right now I saw a poll where more people blame Biden than the Republicans, which makes no sense at all.
No,
right?
It's objectively false, but it's like I was with union guys who give Trump more credit for infrastructure than Biden. I said, you gotta be kidding me, Biden passed it. He said, yeah, Trump would talk about it more. And so we thought, infrastructure, we all thought he cared more. Yeah, so the communication, there's a vast gap, which is why I'm doing this with you.
Yeah, 100%. And you know, and a lot of people know, I'm not the biggest fan of Joe Biden.
I know
right?
that.
But when it comes to the government shutdown, it's nonsensical to blame Joe Biden. It doesn't
Right.
make any sense at all. He doesn't
Yeah.
want to shut down 1%, right?
Right.
And it's the Republicans that are driving it, 100%. Okay, but back to the silver lining. So the other ways that the government shutdown ends is it becomes too painful.
Right.
So like the last time when they broke the record, the air traffic controllers said, well, we're not going to come in and...
Yeah, what happened is all of Trump's friends couldn't fly their private planes. I'm not joking. He started getting calls from his New York buddies saying, knock it off.
Yeah, so that's going to happen again at some point.
Right.
PSA is not going to show up, air
Yeah.
traffic controller.
Right.
If it takes maybe it's not a week, maybe it's a month. If it's not a month, it's definitely 2 months.
Yeah.
By the way, our military is also not going to get paid. 1.3
Right.
million service
It's
members.
shameful. Yeah.
Not only is it immoral and shameful,
Yeah.
but at some point, do soldiers start going, what am I doing here? Why am I showing up for work?
I've said members of Congress shouldn't get paid and senators.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Is that introduced anywhere?
I've introduced it as a concept. I guess I could introduce it as a bill. Yeah.
Because I'll tell you, that'll be the most popular bill in America
Yeah.
if you say, as long as there's a shutdown,
Right.
people in Congress don't get a dime.
Yeah.
Because why should our troops not get paid?
Right.
But the people in Congress that caused the shutdown
I know.
get paid.
It's actually shameful
Absolutely shameful. Okay, but at some point, that's going to snap,
at some point.
right?
Yeah.
So when that snaps, either the Freedom Caucus has to bend,
Right.
or McCarthy has to get Democratic votes.
Correct.
Then there's no way around that, right?
That's, yeah.
Okay, so let's assume the Freedom Caucus says, I don't give a damn about the soldiers, I don't care about the air traffic controllers, I'm not taking any flights, I don't care.
Right.
I'm never going to give you the votes.
Right.
Which is entirely possible.
It's possible.
It is possible, okay? At that point, when McCarthy presumably comes to the Democrats because he literally has no other choice.
Right.
Is it possible to say, yeah, maybe we could have a deal if you give us paid family leave?
Yes, but we'd have to get the Senate too.
Yes.
Yeah.
But by the way, maybe he gives you the deal because he doesn't think it's going to pass in the Senate.
Yeah.
We have it passed in the House.
We've had that happen before. We've passed it in the House before.
That's right. You passed it before.
Yeah.
So maybe for McCarthy, it's a low-paying deal,
Right.
because he gives you a vote you're not going to win in the Senate.
Yeah.
And then we leave it to TYT, see if we can pass it in the Senate.
Right.
Does that sound like a deal?
Yeah, absolutely. If we can get McCarthy to need Democratic votes, and that I think is something that the community watching can mobilize around with the Democrats, because we're the ones who are going to listen most to you, is what are the one or two priorities you want if there was a deal? What is it paid family leave? Maybe what I'm hearing. Is it something else? What's an achievable one? And don't say Medicare for all, because that's not, I'm for it. But you need Bernie as president, you need a progressive as president. But things like this that Biden has run on, that are part of the Biden agenda, what can we push for?
Yeah. So I totally agree with you. You got to be practical. So like the whole country would love to end gerrymandering. At polls around 90%,
Yeah.
right? But the Republicans would never agree to that because
No.
that's the only way they can get a majority in the House.
Right.
So it's not realistic,
Yeah.
right? But paid family leave, where it's 74% of their own voters agree,
Right.
it doesn't get any more realistic than that. Is it possible to ask for two things? Because we'll come up with a second thing.
We should.
Right,
Maybe
because-
we get one.
Yeah, all right, great. You know what? That'll be the second thing we do on
Right.
Operation Hope, come up with a second ask.
Right.
And we want it to be popular with Republican voters, because the good news is...
There are a lot of these policies that are.
Yeah, I write about it in my book. And tons of these policies are very popular, not just with Democratic and Independent voters, but with Republican voters.
Yes.
So those are totally possible. Maybe one of your anti-corruption measures.
Yeah.
Now, at the same time, Republicans definitely don't want to pass those either.
They don't.
I'm not sure a lot of your Democratic colleagues want to pass
Unfortunately, not.
those. Yeah. So maybe that's a little bit unrealistic. We'll come up with a second one. So, okay, now let's assume one more thing then. So that's for this next year or so, while we still have the Biden administration, the Democrats still have the Senate, they have the White House.
Right.
Now let's talk, and we know that in 2024, if Trump wins, nothing is possible. That's it. 4
It's defensive,
long
yeah.
years of our lives
Yeah.
are wasted.
Or they're
And
going
we-
to try to put people like Adam Schiff possibly in jail, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's going to be ugly.
And Mark Milley, and
who knows who else?
And he's promised people in the media. He said NBC, MSNBC will put them in jail. And a lot of people think it's hyperbole, or it's not.
No,
I
it's
don't
not.
think
I mean,
it is.
our system may thwart it, but it's going to be chaos.
Yeah, and They're not joking. They
No, he has got a
definitely mean it.
grudge.
Yeah. And Steve Bannon's not joking,
Yeah.
and they're going to bring in their shock troops, and they literally call them shock troops, right? And so this is good. So paid family leave, higher wages, any kind of public option, any improvement in healthcare. If Trump wins, it's over.
It's over.
That's another 4 years of our lives.
At
guys.
least, and who knows what damage? Because after Trump, I know it's unclear whether we'd say, okay, now finally we want a progressive, or maybe we'll say we just want someone to clean up this mess, and then you're not going to get a Bernie Sanders like progressive elected, right?
Yeah.
So he's a real jolt to the system.
Okay, now let's assume that a Democrat wins in 2024. Okay, but you still need to win the House and the Senate to pass things. Otherwise, the Republicans are going to still bottle you
Right,
up,
yeah.
and you're going to need a couple of miracles for them to shut the government down, and need the Democrats for a vote to reopen it
Right.
back up,
Yeah.
and squeeze one or two bills in. So that's why the House is essential for the Democrats.
Right.
If you don't have the House,
You
again,
need the House,
they're-
you need the Senate, you need a trifecta,
you need the trifecta. Yeah, which
which is what Roosevelt had. People keep saying, why can't we do the New Deal? He had overwhelming trifecta. Why can't we do the Great Society? Johnson had an overwhelming trifecta. Why can't we do the Reagan Revolution? Reagan didn't have it. Reagan had a Democratic House. So it was a different time.
That was a different time, but I'll tell you, it's the overwhelming majority in LBJ and FDR is also a little. It's not exactly right. The analogy is not apt because remember he passed the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act, and he did not have a majority.
Fair
for
enough
those.
on that.
Yeah, he had Dixiecrats who,
Yeah.
under penalty of law, didn't want to pass
that
it.
I don't want to underestimate
Yeah.
his skill in that.
Yeah, and so I think a really strong president who actually pushes for these things can get things passed these days with bare majorities. But the times have changed. They can't pull a Reagan and pass it with Republican
No,
votes.
because that's it. Reagan's tax cuts were very popular, even though they were wrong, and he got Democrats to vote for it. Paid family leave is very popular, but we can't get Republicans to vote for it. I guess the difference is the speaker was probably allowing these Reagan policies to come for votes. Tip O'Neill was willing to negotiate with Reagan in ways that McCarthy's not with Biden.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to look back for just one question because you and I have talked about it on the Young Turks many times, and we've agreed, we've disagreed, we've had a lot of stuff. But looking back on it, should we have done single bills when the Democrats had the trifecta?
We should have.
Yeah, like paid family leave.
We
higher
should. I mean, we
wages,
should have
et cetera.
still done the congregate one because we needed that for reconciliation, and you can only use reconciliation certain times. But we should have just done it to get people on the record.
Yeah. Was it? Do you know if it was that the Democratic leaders were worried that Democrats would vote against them?
I think they didn't want to embarrass their own colleagues if it wasn't needed.
Well, it's often sorely needed, and that's one of the issues, of course. But I don't want to get you in too much trouble.
No.
Okay. Okay. So, kidding aside, though, let me go to one last thing here. So you helped us a lot with the process. Now we know the roadmap.
Yeah. No, it's
and people never talk about it, right?
But it is the hard thing. It's why governance is so hard in this country. It's actually really, really, really hard for a bill to become a law. Like you need a lot of things to work.
Yeah. So let me ask you about actually two things. I'm going to ask you about personal stuff in a second. It's just fun, right? But the last substantive thing is how often do progressives get together and strategize? How often do Democrats get together
Once a
and
week,
strategize?
we have an executive board meeting of the CPC.
And these days
We have a caucus meeting. The caucus meeting is more informational, but once is a caucus every week, once is a progressive group every week.
and everybody shows up?
A lot of people show up.
Yeah. And these days, since you guys are out of power in the House, what do you strategize about?
Let's make sure that we don't give in if we do have a deal with McCarthy to even a penny of cuts beyond what we already have. How do we make sure that we don't make that compromise? Now, we could talk about how do we get some of our values. What can we do to make sure we're getting our values in executive orders that the president's announcing? How can we do better in communicating what we have done? What can we do on immigration to push back against sort of draconian policies and make sure that the White House doesn't adopt the right-wing frame?
Okay, and on the messaging, I think most people are aware, you said it earlier in the discussion, that the Democrats are not great at messaging.
We're not out there, we're not communicating with the volume, speed, interest, vitality that we need to.
Right. And so in the old days, people would do press releases and press conferences.
Doesn't work.
Doesn't work at all now, right?
Doesn't work.
So
It's a yawn.
Yeah, since that doesn't work at all, is there discussion about how do we get our messaging to resonate in this new environment, this new world?
That's the challenge. I mean, I think so much of it is viral now. Social media, online, how do we get that and be active there? And I think that is one of the challenges with the White House. I mean, Biden has been a much better president than I would have thought. He's been more progressive than I would have thought. But the communications actually isn't even where Obama's was, right? I mean, there's not a modern day communication strategy.
Yes. So it seems like in order to get anything these days to be noticed, there needs to be a little bit of conflict.
Right.
So are you ready to say that Marjorie Taylor Greene is against moms?
Sure, that's an easy one. That's an easy one. And Biden is taking on now Marjorie Taylor Greene. He's ramping it up. But I agree with you. I think you've got to take on the fights with big oil, big pharma, the health insurance industry. Take on the fights against the millionaire, billionaire class that is hurting the working class. And Biden did it. I think with the UAW strike was a great one where he did it. We need more of that.
Yeah, and by the way, as I said on the show, you were on the picket line,
yes,
and you asked President Biden
to
join you.
I was one of the first to ask him.
Yeah, and it made a big difference, and he did come out.
He did. Rashida, me, Debbie Dingell. That's a place where progressives push. We got a good result.
Yeah, wonderful. And so, okay, so we'll work on the messaging, right?
Yeah.
And I'm curious if if the caucus is more open to different kind of messaging, and different styles and different outlets.
If your community has ideas, send them to me. I do think we have a problem there. We've got to figure out how we break through.
Yeah. Okay, last thing on that then. So if you were to call out Republican colleagues based on their, not generally, millionaire, billionaire
right,
class, everybody does, and it's kind of at this point.
A cliche.
Yeah, so, or at least expected, right? But if you were to say Representative Don Bacon, although he's kind of a moderate, I don't know that you want to alienate him, you might need his vote on paid family leave, but Representative Jim Jordan or whatever, here is his donors.
Yeah.
And so on this vote, he is selling out to his donors.
Right.
Would that create any kerfuffle in the House, or would that be at this point like Tuesday, right? Pretty normal.
I think it depends on the member, but you certainly could call them out. Yeah, I mean, you could call them out in a campaign setting. I mean, there's rules in the House of what you can say on the House floor.
You can't imply that they might be corrupt because they take corporate campaign contributions?
You probably could. I mean, I don't know the exact rules, but you could certainly do it in some context.
Okay, all right. Now the fun stuff. So, especially given that you guys are out of power, what does a regular day in Congress look like for you these days?
Well, you have these kind of strategy meetings, Progressives Caucus, you've got votes, you've got committee hearings, you have conversations with the press, constituents. That's a day.
Okay, and so the committee hearings, okay, that makes sense, I get it. And you bother to put together proposals, which I suspect most don't.
Most don't. I try to still put legislative proposals, look for where we can get bipartisan consensus, try to figure out how you can pass things or at least move the conversation. My view is just even Medicare for all or political reform, ban PAC money, lobbyist money, stock trading by members, term limits for members, term limits Supreme Court justices. It gets people used to the idea then if we do have a trifecta, boom, there's the plan.
Okay, all right, I love that. Does anybody in Congress ever hang out anymore? Like in the old days, they used to go for drinks, Republican, Democrat, didn't matter. And it sounds fun, although they probably do some terrible things too. But okay, but these days, do people go bowling together? They go for drinks?
But they'll have a lunch together, drinks together. Yeah, less so on both different side of the aisle.
So yeah, is it ever different side of the aisle?
It is, but usually when you're traveling, if you're traveling with members to in a Codal to some foreign country.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense. So, but within your caucus,
less. There's probably less than it should be.
Yeah. But does like Raul Grijalva ever call you up and be like, Raul, come on, let's get out of here. Let's go watch a movie?
Not a movie, no. Maybe a drink.
A drink.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Sounds fun. Okay. All right. Thank you so much for doing this, Raul.
Thank
Appreciate
you,
it.
Cenk. Thank you for you keep this. Project Hope is needed. I'll just say this: your viewers, this is not the time to be apathetic. I'll end with this point. The miracle was that Bernie Sanders came as close as he did. He would have been the nominee after Nevada if they didn't do all of these things of getting everyone to drop out. We're going to have a progressive future in this country, and people don't realize how close we are. And the dam's about to break on the establishment control of the party. This is not the time for folks to give up. It's the time to double down and demand that we become a progressive party.
All right, Representative Khanna, one
Thank
of the
you.
few strong progressives in Congress.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks.